Hello, my name is Professor Kevin Hilton. I'm the independent chair of the Sheffield Race Equality Commission. I am based at Leeds Beckett University, where I was head of the Research Centre for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and more recently the interim Pro-Vice Chancellor, Culture, Equality and Inclusion at the University of Sussex. The Race Equality Commission is a non-partisan strategic assessment into the nature, extent, causes and impacts of racism and racial disparities in Sheffield. Working with 24 commissioners from the Sheffield area, we conducted a series of short, focused hearings over 6 priority areas for the city. These included business and employment, civic life and communities, crime and justice, education, health, sport and culture. In May 2022, we will be presenting the findings and recommendations for the report that will be made available to the public on the Sheffield City Council website. This is the Civic Life and Communities hearing, part 1.
As a participant, and also even as part of the sort of development and structure. I mean, I go to the theatre quite a lot, and I think in the past couple of years, there's been good programs, say, again, at the Crucible, where they've actually brought in some policies where they've tried to have 1 or 2 Black actors in each of the plays that they have produced. Again, that shows and highlights that we have skills, we have developed, and we have people in these professions. Now, the other thing is, how do we actually get people to go into these institutions again? Because although it might sound silly, I think that there's still a general fear from people of actually going into and participating in some of the established institutions, either because people sometimes don't feel welcomed or they don't feel the relevance of actually participating within those institutions. And I think what we have to do is to make programs that are more relevant to the community. We have to make sure that all programs are accessible. We have to make sure that there are programs that are of interest to the different communities that can bring them in at different times. And at times also, as I don't really like to use the term BAME and all this business, but as communities within this city, I think we actually want to fully participate within the life of the city, and we are here as a group of people from different minority groups, and what I think quite often is that white people let us get on with it, and don't actually feel sometimes that they actually have to be involved in sorting out our issues, and I think that they hold the keys, they hold the purse strings, and at some point they actually need to be involved in saying that this is what this city is about. We have the power to actually let this thing happen. All of us can actually offer positive elements to the city development, and all avenues, whether it's the theatre, whether it's the cinema, whether it's things like our carnivals and our other cultural celebrations, need to be things that are open to all. I mean, as a by the by, an example is, a few years ago we actually had a Black Lord Mayor, John Campbell. And one of the things that I actually did was I took a group of, I think it was about 15 or 16 young people to see him in his chamber. I mean, he'd given us a half an hour slot. And we ended up being in the town hall for over 2 hours with him. And the reason why for those young people, it was the first time that they'd actually been inside of that building. They actually had a person there who was part of that institution in his regalia, but who was also explaining to them how the council actually worked, who was explaining to them that it was their building and so forth. But up until that point, that was just a building in the city, and those kids had never been in, had never thought they could be in, had never even associated a Black person as actually having any position within that building. And for them, it was a positive experience where they actually could see things in a different light, And that's what I mean when I say when institutions open up and actually allow people in a positive way, they quite often get a positive response. And we don't have enough of that.
And you've led us nicely into my last question for you, which is, do you feel that BAME young people have a clear route to mentoring and apprenticeship programs in Sheffield?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question at this moment.
Have a go, Leroy.
I would say that with the young people that I sometimes speak to, one of the things that they actually feel is that there is limited opportunity for them within this city. And there are a lot of people who are actually underemployed and not realizing their fullest potential because they don't feel that they actually are given the opportunity to we're not actually given the opportunity to actually get the good jobs or training and experience. Now, one of the things that you also have to realize is that if we acknowledge that there's still a lot of underachievement within the education system, not everybody is actually getting through. If you're actually, your life chances after school can be quite limiting. And again, one of the things that I think a lot of the projects that I was involved with gave young people was a second chance. When we actually worked with people on second chance learning, second chance life skills, when we actually had the vehicle to pinpoint young people to opportunities, they actually took them. And when young people actually I can't work out why kids sometimes here spend years and they can't get a job in McDonald's and would move out to Birmingham and London and immediately get a job. And some of them do quite well, And I'm thinking to myself, why is that? You spent a year trying to get into a low-key job, and you move somewhere else and suddenly you found a niche. Is it because the guidance isn't here? I don't know, right? Which is why I say I don't know if I'm qualified to actually say at the moment, but I do speak to young people who just feel that there is a lack of opportunity for young people here. or that they themselves perceive there to be a lack of opportunity. Certainly, you know, I do some individual mentoring, and those are some of the things that I come up with from young people, you know. And for some of them, the confidence level just isn't there. And you find that with a little bit of coaching, you know, a little bit of coaching sometimes go a long way, you know, to help them. And which is one of the reasons, again, why we need to be thinking about ways in which we develop youth services for young people here. You know, how do we give young people ongoing support within the city? How do we say to young people, well, you know, what have you got? What can you give? You know, how can we make that into something? You know, what are the challenges? You know, yeah, do the young people themselves understand what the issues and the challenges are? Or do we just, you know, want to see them as sort of, you know, drug addicts or, you know, stabbing each other, gun crime, knife crime, and all this business, you know? Yeah, after a while, you begin to live those stereotypes, you know? What we need is some positive developments that actually, you know, work alongside young people, you know. I don't like sitting around waiting for the problem. You know, yes, there are problems there, but there are positive ways that we can develop young people, you know, that they can actually coexist within this society, can make positive contributions to this society, and can go on to achieve in this society, you know.
Thank you, Leroy. I will thank you very much for, you know, answering the questions that I asked. I'll pass you back to Professor Hilton because I see that other commissioners have one or two questions they'd like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. Leroy, we're very close to closing this session, but just a couple of points. One is an offer from Councillor Maroof, who is happy to arrange for a trip to the City Hall, and for any of your groups to engage with the Lord Mayor. Is that right, Maroof? He's nodding, and you know, just
absolutely, Professor. I'd be happy to arrange that, and I've done in the past, and the new Lord Mayor will welcome that. I didn't know that that was this issue before, but yes, I welcome that. So if Leroy contacts me, I can sort that out.
Okay.
And I'm looking at the time, and I'm really tempted to. Yeah, I'm going to go for it. Okay, Yen, I'd like you to ask your question about the carnival, but Leroy, in response, do you think you could keep your response concise? I'm just conscious again of us all.
Hi there, Leroy. My name is Yen Fongling. I'm an artist and a senior lecturer at Sheffield University. I've got a question for you with regards to Carnival. I'm interested in the perception of it as a perceived mass gathering of the Black community. What challenges have you particularly faced regarding this? And I'm thinking of this in view of, you know, the right to protest, etc., and how Carnival's history is rooted as a sort of form of protest. Is there a particular link here for you, and what have you personally experienced historically?
Well, I see Carnival in a number of ways. Firstly, it's a celebration of our emancipation from slavery, you know, and I think, you know, we can't forget that, you know, we came out of slavery, and we celebrated the fact that, you know, we were out of it. And one of the things that we used it was as a platform for social protest. So you would find that in some of the traditional costumes, you know, we have a thing called the Dame Marie, and, you know, who would emulate the European masters, and, you know, in their dress and their costume, and there's a whole sort of mimicry that's going on there, you know. And whereas the buses will say, "Oh, that looks good," and they say, "Yeah, we remember a guy in you," and there's a whole thing about political commentary, which you find in our sort of calypso musics and so forth. So yes, it's a political tool, but it's also a way, as I said previously, of allowing us to actually examine our culture, practice our cultural heritage, share our skills and our culture with other people. And it's an open participation event where anyone can actually participate within it. Yes, it is colorful. Yes, we have a good time dancing around. But it's also historical. The roots of our carnival is in Africa. Africa is about the drum. Not only do we use African drums, but one of the latest drums that was developed in the Caribbean was the steel drums.
Can I ask, do you think it's been marginalized? Just to not to talk specifically about the history, but more about this idea of racial inequality that's been subject to the project?
I don't think people understand it or want to understand it, and therefore it does get marginalized, but I think it is an easy way for us to actually work within the city. Over the past 2 or 3 years, we've done several workshops in the city library, in Western Park Museum, for instance, around costume making. And they have always been full, they have always been full. We haven't had to beg anybody to come, We haven't even taken, I haven't even taken my own kids and grandkids there, right? Because there has been no shortage of young people coming to those workshops and adults, right? So if we actually do it, and if we see it in a positive light, people will participate, And although I speak from the point of view of the African Caribbean communities, I'd love to share in the cultures of some of the other communities. And I think that other communities within the city sometimes hide their culture because they are not sure how it will be received.
Sure.
Right?
Leroy, I love your positivity. It's absolutely amazing. It's infectious. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to stop you there. And I'm glad that you're drawing on Leroy's energy, but unfortunately I have to move us on. But I do appreciate, Leroy, your time and the commissioner's questions. Leroy, hopefully we'll get a chance to see you at some point, and I hope you can stay in touch with the Race Equality Commission, and perhaps through your contact with Rhonda at the very least. But thank you very much for attending today and sharing with us your experience.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak. I've noticed that there's a few messages coming through, and that I'd like to correspond with. I mean, I would think that my email can be passed on to anyone who actually wants to be in contact, and I'll be willing to actually have conversations with people outside of this and take up any offers that there.
Well, thank you very much, Leroy. We will need to move on to our next session, but hopefully you can stay in touch with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Clara. Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any video?
Pardon?
Do you have any video, Clara?
Yeah, I can do if you want me to. Yeah, here I am. Hello.
If you're happy with that, that's great. It's always nice to put a face to the name. It's good to meet you. My name's Kevin Hilton, and chair of the Race Equality Commission. Before we get going, Clara, I'd like to just hand you over to Adele Robinson, who's going to go through some housekeeping.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon, Clara. I'm Adele Robinson and I'm part of the Race Equality Commission Secretariat. And I'm just going to take you through a little bit about what the Commission is.
Yeah.
So the Commission is an inquiry into the nature, extent, causes and impact of race inequality and racism within Sheffield. It was established to focus on 6 key areas: health, education, civic life and communities, crime and justice, business and employment, and sport and culture. And today's the first day of the Civic Life and Communities hearing. At the culmination of all of the hearings, there will be a report submitted for action to the key stakeholders in Sheffield. The Commission has invited you here as a witness today to share your knowledge and information on the issues talked about in the terms of reference of the Commission. And those 5 key areas are racial inequality and racism in Sheffield, which you feel may be of interest to the Commission, your knowledge and of your own or other approaches to race-related frameworks or duties, any analysis of the causes of racism or racial inequality within your sector, any examples of good practice in relation to reducing racial inequality or racism within the city, and what you believe would be the best way to tackle racism and racial inequality in the city. As a witness, you're required to act in good faith, and obviously by inviting you here and you being here, we are assuming that that is the case. For all those in attendance, the hearing is being recorded and will be available afterwards. Any confidential information that you've put forward won't be put on the Commission's website, but anything that isn't confidential will be. Can all in attendance wait for an invitation from the chair before speaking? And can commissioners and any attendees introduce yourself before speaking? If you've got any questions, can you put them in the chat privately to me and I'll send them on to the chair. And now can I hand you back over to the independent chair, Professor Kevin Hilton. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adele, and welcome, Clara, and commissioners. Thanks for staying with us just before the lunch break. Clara, thanks very much for your submission. As you can see, I'm joined by the other commissioners from the Sheffield Race Equality Commission, who I will invite to speak with you in a short while. I wonder if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, and perhaps just offer us a summary of the submission that you sent us a little while ago.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Clara.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm Clara, nice to meet you all. So I'm 24, I'm white British, as you can see, and I've lived in Sheffield all my life, born and raised here, and have decided to continue living here because I think it's a great city and yeah, I love living here. So I grew up in Sharrow, Nether Edge area. I still live in Nether Edge. I went to Sharrow Primary School, had great experiences there. I then went to King Edward School and also had a great experience there as well. And I currently work for Sheffield City Council. I do business administration in the Children and Families Department, working with social workers, and really enjoy my role. I've been there for over 4 years now. And yeah, so my submission, I spoke a little bit about my experience in both the schools I went to, and then a bit about my experience working for the council. And I feel like I didn't put that much positive stuff in there, and I would like to start by saying that I am proud to work for Sheffield City Council, and you know, being an ambassador for the council, and you know, it's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to submit evidence. And yeah, so I did put in some negative stuff, but there is also some positive stuff to say about the council and how, you know, racism is dealt with and things. But yeah, I did give some examples on some stuff that I'd felt uncomfortable about there. And then I also went on to talk about some more public settings, so some things that I've witnessed when on public transport, stuff that I've witnessed when being with like families and friends and things like that. And yeah, just some of the things that I've witnessed. And yeah, I was just really happy to see that there was this commission taking place, and thought that, yeah, I wanted to give evidence. And yeah, thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'll just emphasise that you're here as a resident of Sheffield, right, rather than a representative of the local.
Yes, no, definitely. I'm doing this in a personal capacity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to invite Gulnaz Hussain to speak with you. So Gulnaz, I wonder if you could introduce yourself before asking your first question.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I'm Gulnaz Hussain, and I'm part of the Race Commission, and it's really good to see you here today, Clara, and also you know, how you put yourself in our shoes for that moment, probably when you were writing that submission. So really appreciate the time you've given to put that submission together, but also to come and give a voice from another perspective, because what we are looking at in this commission is to get all perspectives on the situation in Sheffield around race. Sorry about that. I'll just start with our first question. Your experience of being a young white female in Sheffield presents an interesting perspective on racism. It is one that recognises your own privileges of not having to experience racism directly, while being reflexive about your own observations of racism growing up in the city. So we wanted to further elaborate on this. Can you say a little bit more about how racism manifests where there is no obvious BEMA presence at school or at work?
Yeah, so yeah, I do really recognise my privilege, and I strive to be anti-racist. And I think for me, going to Sheffield Primary School was a really valuable thing, because that is a very diverse school. Being white was the minority there, which meant that I grew up, you know, with all these different cultures, and that was just great. And for me, from my memory of it, racism just didn't really exist, because there was that many different cultures. You know, everyone got on, and it was great. And then going to King Edward's it still would be classed as a diverse school, but it's, you know, it was different for me. I remember thinking, wow, there's so many more white people here. And yeah, I think that's when I kind of definitely started to notice more about how differently the Black and ethnic minority students were treated, mainly by other students, is my memory of it. And, you know, having friends who, you know, had to deal with that racism and not feeling able to kind of raise it with teachers just because maybe they didn't think something was going to be done about it. But yeah, that's for me where I kind of, you know, started to notice it more. Yeah, so then in work, as I've said, there are some good things. So, you know, we have e-learning. I know that some social workers, for example, go on specific courses because they're going to be working with these communities, for example, the Roma Slovak community, and they get to go on these specific courses about that so they can learn and understand about their culture and things. So that stuff I think is great. But, you know, I have had, there's these situations where I've heard language used that I personally wouldn't use and feel uncomfortable hearing. And I think when I first started, if I'd heard that stuff, I definitely kind of didn't feel comfortable saying anything about it. Now, as I said, I've been there for a lot longer. Even since writing this submission, I've kind of had some more open conversations with people, which I think is a really good thing, being able to talk about it and kind of say, oh, well, I don't think that, you know, I don't feel comfortable with that language being used. And, you know, people have said that they don't know what's right and what they should use and shouldn't use. And so I kind of think that actually a lot of it comes from just a lack of knowledge and, yeah, just not being sure. And as I said as well, I think in my submission, you know, I think most people don't think of themselves as racist. But, you know, we have to be striving to be anti-racist and, you know, be recognising that we have got that unconscious bias and, you know, you've got to kind of you know, constantly be kind of checking yourself and thinking, well, why did I think that about something? Is it anything to do with their race or something like that? And that doesn't just come about race, you know, that can be about anything, you know, their sex, you know, a lot of different things. But yeah, I think that maybe that can, I don't know the best way. I think it's a really complicated situation, and I don't know the best way necessarily to, you know, do something about this, but I do wonder if there was more specific training available to everyone in the council about racism, then that might be a good thing. And, you know, just being able to have more of those honest and open conversations, because I think that people are scared to have the conversations. And the other thing I would like to say as well is that I do think there needs to be more representation in those senior management roles, because I do, from my perspective, the further up the hierarchy you go, the whiter it kind of gets, and that means that you've got, you know, mainly white people in those positions with more authority, and if there was more diverse people in those senior roles, then I think that could only be a good thing.
Yeah, just elaborating a little bit more in terms of dialogue that you've had, or what you think is helpful. Do you think that different communities different members of staff within the council, or you know, inside schools as well, there should be more talk and more cross section of communities having that dialogue? Do you believe?
I think that would be really good, because I've had quite a few like one-on-one conversations with people, and you know, we're able to engage really well about it, and I think that's, you know, I think I am able to understand, because of the fact that I went to Shire Primary School and things like that, like I'm in a position where I'm able to kind of have some of those conversations with people. But then if it's like a wider group with people that don't have that kind of more of a background knowledge already, then it can be more difficult. But if you've got, yeah, as you say, cross sections of, you know, the community and stuff all having conversations together, then I think that would be great.
That's really, really valuable. That's really valuable, the insight that you've given us today, and it'll help us out in our approach. Is there any mechanism for you to tackle these issues at work, and if so, do you use them? So you've talked about the dialogue that you've started due to the Race Equality Commission. Is there anything else you want to elaborate on that, and any mechanisms that you've kind of developed, or you want, you know, how you can use them?
Well, as I said in my submission, there is obviously the like the basic dignity and respect at work and things, and you know, I do think like for me, if I did see any like outright overt racism, no doubt about it, I would immediately be like reporting that to my manager and like raising it, and yeah, wanting that to be tackled head on with that individual. But my main concern is that it's not individuals that need to be kind of dealt with. It needs to be like, you know, kind of from the top down, an institutional thing where everyone is kind of treated the same and just needing that kind of access to that guidance. Because the way I see it is that if I, in my workplace, am seeing that I'm hearing these, you know, things that are said that I don't feel comfortable with, the, you know, terms being used that I don't think should be used, but it's not directly, you know, outright calling an individual something completely racist. It's, you know, kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but just, you know, it's more of that feeling. And I think that if I'm feeling that where I work, then it's likely that that's happening in a lot of teams all across the council. And so for me, that means that it is a wider issue, and that instead of tackling it with specific individuals, it needs to be tackled from the council as a whole. And yeah.
Laura, you're saying it needs embedding, it needs deeply embedding in all the levels of structure, because it's okay you hearing it, but then when you're hearing something like that, you're feeling that, but you can't express it. But you need to know that there is mechanisms that are embedded deeply in those structures, so that, you know, it doesn't happen. And if it does happen, it's not an individual issue. It is within, you know, it's dealt with at a wider level.
Yeah.
And at a higher level.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That came across really, really well, and I think it kind of answers the question really well. Thank you for that. So you talked on your submission, I read it really, really carefully, and I was really, you know, taken back by a lot of things that you said, and I kind of like can link it to personal. I'm sure all of our commissioners today can link it to lived experiences that we've had. So talking about the wider context in social spaces around Sheffield, how would you gauge the pace or shifts in racism in recent times?
It's difficult.
I know,
Sorry?
I said take your time.
Well, I think especially in more recent times because of COVID, I've not been out and about that much. But I mean, I think for me, there seems to be a lot of people just say racism doesn't exist anymore, or it doesn't exist like it used to. It's not a problem. But for me, it doesn't take much to actually notice it and realise that, yes, it does, and it is still a problem. For example, only on Saturday, I was walking into town and witnessed someone using racial slurs, and I actually called 101 about it. But, you know, that was literally only a few days ago, and that's the first time I've, you know, been out walking into town in a real long time, and it happened. So, yeah, I think it does still happen a lot. But I think, you know, some of the things I put in my submission that, you know, people weren't being, as I say, overtly racist. They weren't saying directly racist stuff. But then when I called them out on it, their response was, "I'm not racist," which just to me immediately shows that their behaviour is embedded in racism. You know, that's why they were doing what they were doing. And yeah, I think it happens a lot. I think that some people just don't see it, maybe because they're not looking for it or they just don't want to see it. And I think the other thing is that, you know, it's just not reported as much as, you know, hopefully it should be, because people don't know what's going to be done about it, or, you know, aren't going to be taken serious, or like, oh, well, it's just a one-off offhand incident. But actually all those incidents add up, and actually it does happen a lot. There is unfortunately still a lot of racism in Sheffield.
That's really, really, you know, really informative for us. And I'll just pass you over to Kevin, and I think he might want to carry on the discussion, or if there's any other further questions from the commissioners. Yeah. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you, Gulnaz. Clara, thank you very much for your responses. They've been very helpful and very insightful. It also gives us some insight into what some people would describe as backstage racism. And I'm guessing that you're giving us insight into the sort of racism and racial dynamics that someone who looks like me wouldn't be privy to, because people aren't likely to make those comments, because they definitely know that I wouldn't be happy with those comments. But is there a sense that because you might look like those people that they feel that you think that the same? So do you feel that you're privy to perhaps more of those everyday racisms than I might be?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the case, to be honest. You know, with some of the examples at work, so it has been when there's only white people around and only maybe 2 or 3 of us, and I've been like, are you only saying this because I'm white as well? And you think that, you know, it's not going to bother me. And as I said, now, at the start, when I first started, I definitely didn't call it out enough, but I'm trying to actively be better at doing that. And then, yeah, in other situations as well, like with like family, friends or things like that. And, you know, it could just be, you know, all of us that are there often, you know, we're a group of white people, and yeah, things are said, and I, in that situation, also call things out and say that it shouldn't be said. But yeah, if there was, you know, someone who wasn't white there, would it be said? I doubt it, personally, because I think they would know that those people wouldn't feel comfortable with it. But yeah, so I think I probably do see more of these everyday racism incidents than other people might.
Yes. Thank you. I think it's really helpful for people to hear that, because it also offers some credence to this notion of allyship and the need to be anti-racist and what that could actually look like, because it's an issue for all of us, and we all have power to a certain degree to make a change. Can I just ask Shruti and Maruf to prepare yourselves to ask questions, and we'll go with Shruti first and then Maruf. And can I also ask you to keep your questions brief, given the time? Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks very much, Clara, and thank you for coming. And you know, I think it takes a great deal of courage to contribute to a commission like this so openly in the way that you have from your perspective, and I think we all thank you for that. I used to work for the council a long time ago, I don't anymore, and I am a Nether Edge resident actually, so I've been here for 20 years, just up the road from where you went to school. So it's really great hearing from you. You said, I wanted to ask you about the council actually. You said people are scared to have conversations, and I wondered if you had thought about why that is, you know, and are there some things they're more comfortable talking about, some things they're less comfortable talking about? But I wondered if you had thought about, you know, why they are scared of having conversations. Is there something in the culture? Is there something in how equalities is done at the council? What is it that makes them scared to talk about, to have those conversations?
I think from what I've seen, I think that it may just be that people, as I said before, kind of don't have the knowledge. You know, what was, you know, politically correct for them when they were younger might not be deemed politically correct now. And I think that sometimes that can make people feel like they're scared to say the wrong thing. So, you know, for fear of people, you know, calling them racist, you know, saying, well, if you've said that, that means you must be racist then, and not wanting to kind of have that label on them. Whereas, you know, if you can kind of, if you are able to have the open conversations where there isn't that judgment, you know, if people do say something and then you say, well, you know, I don't think that really should be the term that's used now, but you're not saying that to them in a judgmental, oh, you're a racist, you know, horrible kind of way, then that might mean that they feel more able to have those conversations. But I don't know if this is something that is specific to, you know, the council, or if this is something that, you know, people would feel in several workplaces, just not being able to have those conversations like that. But as I said, I have had some more of those kind of open conversations a bit more recently, which I've thought, you know, it's been good. I've been glad that I've been able to have those conversations. But yeah, I mean, there isn't like for me, from what I've seen, there isn't from like, you know, like a management side of it. It's not like there's these informed conversations and there isn't the culture, you know, going on. You know, it's just been a few individuals where we've ended up kind of talking about it. But yeah, I'm not sure the best way of making it a better environment for those conversations to take place. Yeah, I'm not sure how that could be done.
That's okay, thanks a lot, Sarah.
Thank you, Shruti. Maruf?
Thank you, Professor Kevin. I'm also an elected member as well. I'm a councillor, and I'm interested to hear, I was at the council as a senior officer for 20 odd years as well, Clara. So thank you for what you've come across really well today, and it's something that I need more people to come across. Two questions for you. One is, you talked about high-level positions within the council. Do you think the lack of high-level positions within the council being occupied by primarily a certain type of people does restrict the filtering downwards of a more inclusive workforce? Because, and I'll lead you on to this one as well, is I have asked that question, and I keep getting told by chief officers that we are proportionate, and I don't see the proportionality at all. So that's number one, question number one. And it takes brave people like you to come forward and sort of agree with me on things like that. Secondly, do you have much member engagement at all, elected member engagement? Because we keep asking these questions time and time again, and we keep getting, best way to describe it is probably neutral, nebulous answers coming back from chief officers saying we're doing fantastically well, we've ticked every single box. You look at every single report that is prepared by the City Council, and there is a race equality element to it, which says all good and well, ticked, and off it goes. And it's refreshing to hear from yourself to say that there is that issue. And so the question is, number one, does the high level positions impede a better sort of inclusive workforce? And number two, how can members engage with the workforce more than they're doing at the present? Because I feel as though sometimes chief officers end up as being the gatekeepers for us to access normal members of staff.
Yeah, so I do think that, you know, if you don't have the people in that high level positions, then it's not going to trickle down in the same way, like, you know, because it is the lived experience that I think makes the most difference of knowing, you know, your experience of when you were working in the council.
Absolutely.
And I just think that if you don't have people who've got that lived experience, who actually, you know what they're talking about, then you're not going to be able to have that equality and the things that you need to get that equality trickle down. So I do think it is really important that it is more representative. And I said as well, you know, in my submission that, you know, even just the makeup of the people that I work with, I know that that doesn't reflect the communities that we work with. So I think that I think it is really, really important. I think it's one of the main ways that you would actually achieve the difference that is required, is that if you have Black and ethnic minority people in those senior positions able to make those decisions that need to be made, and I think that their lived experience is going to support making the right decisions. As you said, you know, when you're trying to contact chief officers and they're saying, yeah, they're all boxes ticked, everything's fine, everything's good, it doesn't surprise me. But like, as I've said, there isn't I think it's probably because there isn't that over direct racism, but because there is still this, what I'd kind of described as passive racism, yeah, like it is still a problem. It is definitely still a problem. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And I mean, being able to engage with people like me, I don't know the best way for you to go about doing that, because as you said, if you're speaking to people about it and they're just kind of being like, yeah, everything's fine, and closing the gate on it, then I don't know how you get past that, really. But I think that if you were able to, then I think people would engage. I think people would want to have conversations, and you know, I think being listened to and being able to give that information is really important.
Clara, I find it really scary 20, 30 years onwards, and we're still talking about the same issues that existed then, and we've had that many initiatives within the council to alleviate this problem. It may be, I mean, I'm not suggesting this, our chair, Professor Kevin Hilton, will decide on this. Maybe one of the recommendations could be that members have a better engagement with the workforce of the City Council, rather than relying on, best way to describe it is probably, I might be speaking out of tune here, but sanitized reports that we get to see. And then people turn around to us and say, look, why aren't things changing in the council? So that could be one of the things. But it does actually still scare me that we were not reflective of the community that we represent, and you quite eloquently put that to the Commission, and I think it's incumbent upon us to take that on board. Thank you, Professor Kevin.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Dr. Sharon Curtis to lead us out of this session. So this will be the last question. Sharon, could you introduce yourself before asking your question, please?
Hello, Clara. I'm Dr. Sharon Curtis. I actually work within the city, heading up a children's centre, but I also work on national levels for the early years sector. I was really interested in the way that you spoke, and it's a bit of a, yeah, just asking where you feel you are, but would you consider becoming a councillor for Sheffield City Council?
It's not really something that I've thought about. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I thought it's going to sound really bad when we've got councillors here, but I'm not really 100% sure what it actually involves.
Well, that in itself is a good answer, to be able to say how that information actually disseminates as to how people make those kind of decisions. So really in asking the councillors, yeah, to make sure that young people get a little bit more information in terms of that.
Yeah, it's something that, you know, I feel like I hear it and explained to me and I'm like, oh yeah, I get that. And then it sounds so bad, but then, you know, it just kind of goes out again and I'm just like forgotten. So yeah, sorry, I feel like that's so rude.
It's very honest. So thank you for that. So thank you. Yeah, it was just as you was talking, it was a question that just kind of came about, whether you would consider in terms of your reflections and how you've experienced both the council itself and on a personal level. So thank you very much for coming today. It's been great to hear from you. So I'm going to hand you back to Professor Hilton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon and Clara. Thank you very much for your oral testimony today and your evidence. It's been really, really helpful. We hope you keep an eye on the Commission and its progress. And it would be great if down the line we could have further contact if required, if necessary, if we needed to follow anything up with you.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah, thank you very much for having me today.
Both Craig and Tom. Craig, I'm Kevin Hilton. I'm chairing the session today. Before we go any further, I'd just like to hand over to my colleague Adele Robinson, who leads the Secretariat, who's going to go through some housekeeping.
Good afternoon to both of you. I'm just going to go through a little bit about what the Commission is before we start. So just for a little bit of context. So the Commission is an inquiry into the nature, extent, causes and impact of racial inequality and racism within Sheffield. The Commission was established to look at 6 key themes: health, education, civic life and communities, business and employment, crime and justice, and sport and culture. And today is the first day of the Civic Life and Communities hearing. At the culmination of all of the hearings, there'll be a report which will be published for action for the key stakeholders in Sheffield. The Commission has invited you as witnesses today to share your knowledge of the following key areas within the terms of reference of the Commission. The following areas are racial inequality and racism in Sheffield, which you feel may be of use to the Commission. Knowledge of your own or other approaches to race-related duties or frameworks. Any analysis of the cause of racism or racial inequality within your sector. Any examples of good practice in reducing racism or racial inequality. And what you believe would be the best way to tackle racism and racial inequality within your city. As a witness, you're required to act in good faith, and by appearing here today, we're assuming you are doing that. And for those in attendance, please note that the hearing is being recorded and it will be available at some point soon on the Commission's website. Only Commissioners can ask questions, but any evidence that you've submitted that isn't confidential, again, will be made public and on the Commission's website. Can those in attendance wait for the chair, an invitation from the chair before speaking? And can Commissioners and guests please introduce yourself before speaking? And now I'd like to hand you back to the Independent Chair, Professor Kevin Hilton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I just make a point to commissioners that I'm not going for the show of hands. I need the questions to go into the chat and for Adele to send them through to me. Okay, just it will give me a much clearer idea of the connection between your question and what's being discussed at the time. So thank you very much for that. Tom and Craig, thanks for attending today. Thanks also for your submissions. They were very, very helpful. Before I introduce my colleagues to speak with you, Craig and Tom, I wonder if you could make a short statement about your submissions. But before you do that, if you could just state your name and your organisation and the capacity in which you're attending today, that would be very, very helpful. And if you played a part in the writing of the evidence, if you could just make that point as well. So who'd like to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I got to the mute button first.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Kevin. So my name's Tom. I'm the director of City of Sanctuary Sheffield. So we're an organisation of six employees working to try and create a city that is safe and welcoming for people seeking sanctuary. And I can go into the ways that we do that if the Commission wants me to go into it further. In terms of my capacity in this space, so we sat down together as a staff team to put together the evidence, because a lot of the evidence that we've submitted comes from experience of those on the ground working face to face with the asylum system. And also in my previous life, I was running a project in London in the same space. So I contributed in that area. So yeah, it was a collective effort, but then I submitted it and I'm speaking for the staff team in relation to that evidence today.
And could you say a little bit more about the evidence? Just a little bit. We'll be just to let you know, Tom, that everybody has access to your evidence.
Right.
So it's just a summary statement about the evidence.
Yeah, of course. So I suppose there are a few things to know, and I want to start with these points. And I know this is a Sheffield Commission, but I'm going to take it global to begin with, to remind people that of all the people seeking sanctuary in the world, 80% of them are accommodated in countries neighbouring to the ones they're fleeing from. And those countries often have acute food insecurities and issues relating to poverty. So I always like to start what I say with a reminder that we are not doing that much in the global context to support people seeking sanctuary. The other thing to know, and I'm not sure how aware all of the panelists are of the kind of all of the naming that goes on in the sector, but I suppose there are three key groups of people that we work with. There are refugees, so that's people who have come to the UK, who've applied for asylum and have been granted leave to remain in the UK. So they've been allowed to remain. And then there are asylum seekers, which I'm going to split into two categories. One is a group who are currently seeking asylum and are in the process. And the other group is people who have been in the process for a long time and have applied again and again, had all their appeals rejected, and they're refused asylum seekers. Now, ASSIST work much more closely with that group of people, but just to note that when someone is a refused asylum seeker, that often doesn't mean that they don't have a legitimate claim to stay. It's often the case that they haven't had the right legal representation, they haven't had access to the right advice, and the Home Office has a culture of disbelief. So the fact that they've lost their appeals doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a right to stay. So those are the communities that we're working with. In terms of the evidence, looking at the issues, the initial issues that we highlighted, I mean, I could talk for hours about the issues disproportionately affecting people of colour in the asylum system, because the majority of people in the asylum system are people of colour. Just to highlight a few: low paid, insecure work for refugees, asylum seekers often dragged into the black market because there's a ban on them working. poor housing administrated by a for-profit company, either Mears or Serco or some other organisation who has a contract with the Home Office, a contract that is not fit for purpose and therefore has discrimination and oppression built into its structure. Pitiful asylum support payments, so £36 a week given to asylum seekers with a few additional pounds if you have young children or are pregnant. Access to healthcare, there's a inequitable access to healthcare for asylum seekers. They cannot access secondary healthcare, which is obviously a huge part of healthcare. So they can access emergency treatment, but they can't access follow-up treatment, which creates a whole host of issues. Again, there's one very sad example in Sheffield, which I could go into if needed. Funding in the sector is not enough. It's piecemeal, and it disproportionately goes to organisations led by people not of colour, so white people. And I think it is an issue in the sector that the majority of organisations working for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers are majority white organisations, and that needs to change. The other thing we highlighted was lack of knowledge of anything about the asylum system outside of people who work quite closely with the system. So I'm always surprised when I give talks to people about how surprised they are when I'm explaining a few of the very basic things like the ban on work that is on asylum seekers. You know, people have never heard of that. And that's just a very headline example of the institutional violence that is meted out through the asylum system. And then also we highlighted the othering of an entire community. So wrapping an entire community of people in the language of asylum seeker or refugee. Now we try at City of Sanctuary Sheffield to refer to people seeking sanctuary because it gives them the status of being a person before their immigration status. And I think there's harm done mainly in the mainstream media by just othering an entire community by calling them one thing, when, as we all know, we are multitudes of everything. I want to touch briefly as well on something that actually we didn't submit, but has become more and more evident over the last year, which is the oppression hidden by bureaucracy that is inherent in the asylum system. So just two examples of that, which I kind of want to add to our evidence through this hearing, is so when asylum seeker payments are given, they're given through an Aspen card, so like a little bank card. You go to the ATM and you can get your £36 out a week. Now, in the last month, they have changed supplier of those cards. In doing that, a number of people have been unable to access money for the last 3 weeks, and there's nothing they can do about it. And it's one example of computers saying no and them not being able to access money and therefore being destitute. The other example I want to give is when you finally gain status, you're given what's called a biometric residence permit, another little card. And you can't, without that card, access benefits. You can't access housing. You can't move on with your life. And a number of people have been experiencing 3, 6 month, year-long delays in receiving the card, having been given status. Just another example to me of the inherent oppression in the system. Finally, looking at our evidence and thinking about possible solutions, I split them.
Tom, before you get into solutions, if we can hear from Craig, we'll come back to you. Craig, if you could just introduce yourself and say a little bit about your position and your submission, that would be great.
Thank you. My name is Craig Barnett. I'm the volunteering coordinator for Assist Sheffield, here on behalf of the leadership team. Assist Sheffield is a local charity which works with people who've had their asylum claim refused, as Tom was talking about. So those people who are asylum seekers who've had a claim refused and have become homeless and destitute as a result. The main sort of things I'd just like to highlight from our evidence really is just as Tom said, I think most people are quite shocked and really amazed to discover that this country for many years, for 15 years, through successive governments, we've had a deliberate public policy of enforced destitution for refused asylum seekers. So that means that refused asylum seekers have got, it's called no recourse public funds. So that's a specific instrument, which means that they have no legal right to access the benefit system, the housing system, most hospital treatment or education. At the same time, they're also refused the right to work. So that while people have got a claim in process, as Tom mentioned, they're given a minimal financial support and housing from the Home Office. Once their claim is refused and their appeal rights are exhausted, they still have got no rights to access any kind of public funds or housing, and they're still refused the right to work. And in many cases, for all sorts of reasons, they cannot return to their country of origin. And this means that they are homeless and destitute with no other option. They've simply got no option to support themselves as a matter of public policy. And it's a very deliberate attempt to starve people out of the country, even people who sometimes have no way of returning to their country or to a safe country. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to highlight in terms of what we see in terms of its impact on racial inequality in the city is it goes much wider than simply the impact on those individuals who are refused asylum seekers. Obviously for them it's devastating. Some people are in that situation for years. We've worked with people who've been in that situation for over a decade, and sometimes then eventually want leave to remain after 10, 11, 12 years of that kind of crushing, deliberate policy and poverty and destitution. But it has a much wider impact, because the wider impact is that for most people in that situation, and there are thousands of people in that situation, and nobody even knows how many there are, in fact, but most of them are supported not by, certainly not by the government, not by charities, they're supported by migrant communities. So the burden of actually providing minimal kind of support to allow people to live who are in this situation falls on the most marginalized migrant communities in our city, because refused asylum seekers who are homeless and destitute, most of them are staying with friends, or people from their home community or people from their faith community. Often those people who are offering that support are themselves in poverty, themselves in insecure accommodation. So someone who's a homeless refused asylum seeker may have to constantly move between different people from their faith community or their friendship group, sleeping on sofas, on floors. Sometimes the people who are offering that kind of support are in breach of their own tenancy agreements by doing it, so they become at risk of being evicted. So there's a huge burden being placed on migrant communities by the existence of this policy of destitution. It leads to overcrowding, and obviously in the case of the pandemic, it leads to breaching COVID laws and guidelines. It's impossible to be safe in a pandemic situation when people are forced into that kind of housing situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that context, what Assist does is we provide some accommodation in a number of houses which have been given or lent to us by supporters, and we've accommodated 60 people during the course of the pandemic. But we cannot increase that. Previously, we used to run a night shelter, and we used to have a network of volunteer hosts who provided a spare room for our clients. There's no way to do that safely in the current environment. And during the pandemic, the council has been accommodating people who would otherwise have been street homeless. But a council have been announced in September last year that they were going to discontinue that and simply return people to street homelessness.
Okay, great.
Yeah, okay. Leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. I know you've got a lot more to say, and we want to hear from both of you. I'd like to invite my colleague, Commissioner Ruth Mcdonald, to speak with you. Ruth, could you introduce yourself and then proceed with your questions?
Hi, Tom. My name's Ruth. Is it Tom? And sorry, I've misread the name.
Craig.
Sorry, because I'm too busy writing notes. Tom and Craig. My name's Ruth Mcdonald. I'm a social worker, and that's probably why we're writing quite a lot down, because I've just come up against a few issues with a few young people. So I'm one of the commissioners, and I'm going to be asking you a few questions, set questions. So I'll start with Tom. Tom, basically, what is your experience in regards, I know you've gone into it quite in depth, but I'm just going to go a little bit further. So looking basically, what is your experience in regards of the refugees' asylum status that influence their treatment in the public facilities and services?
Thanks, Ruth. That's a really good question. I think it's huge. The impact of how they are treated when they walk into the DWP, when they walk into Housing Solutions, it's huge. And I think it speaks to the point I made about lack of knowledge of the area. You know, people don't understand what they're going through, don't understand the bind they're in, and people who would ordinarily empathize if they knew everything or knew the background don't. And what you end up with is very bureaucratic, impenetrable, traumatic experiences when people go through the system. And I think it speaks to one of the suggestions that I think could help this space, which is a commitment from the council to, and I specify the council because I think it's the best place to start, because that's where most of the services are delivered and most of these barriers are found. But a commitment to ongoing education of all members about the asylum system, the situation people are in, the things they've gone through, and what is expected of staff. I think one of the issues is that people are fearful of immigration because the Home Office has created a culture of fear. So frontline staff are fearful of supporting people because they may be found in breach of some part of the hostile environment of the policies the Home Office have come up with over successive governments. So I think empowering people to be the empathetic people that they are through training and development of the council could make a big difference to that. But in answer to your initial question, I think it's a huge issue.
Yeah. I remember some years ago, there was quite a lot of training that was actually out for social workers, but you don't tend to see that as much anymore. And I don't know the reasons why that actually is, but just moving on onto your next question, you outline how refugees do a high proportion of frontline precarious work. What are the steps that lead to this?
I think it's a number of things. I think for asylum seekers, obviously they can't work, but some of them do end up working in the black market, which is even more precarious and dangerous, and people are ripe for being exploited. And then I think for refugees who've just been granted status and just arrived to the country, I think the issues there are language issues that they face accessing work. I think employment practices of organizations are not well set up to enable people who have low levels of English and come from different cultures and different backgrounds to work effectively in those spaces. So I think there are not enough entry-level roles with pathways leading out of insecure work and into more secure employment. So I think people get stuck in this insecure work where they're not getting any additional training, and therefore the chance of them moving on from that is hard. And therefore, and also, the general progression of people who are born in this country through their working life is education, internship, graduate employment, whatever, that middle thing. But in that space, it's kind of expected that you get training and development, and a graduate role is about moving you on in the employment ladder. And I think if you enter the workforce at a later date with the barriers that I mentioned, that doesn't exist. Absolutely. And that prevents moving on.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, next question is basically is how can we make this better?
I think big institutions have a big role to play in the movement for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. Mm. So it's about the bigger institutions making commitments to creating those entry-level roles, creating those pathways through, having recruitment practices that are equitable, so reduce the barriers for people coming from refugee backgrounds to access them. Because we're working on that in our organisation. There's ongoing work to do in that area, but we are doing the work to make recruitment practices equitable, to have pathways through. But the reality is there's 6 people in our organisation. Yeah. And if we want systemic change, we need big institutions to commit to doing the hard work that requires capacity to make those changes. So those entry-level roles and the pathways through the organisation, and ongoing education of the people within those organisations, so they understand barriers that people face. They also understand the benefit that they bring to the organisation, and then they're empowered to make those changes.
Yeah. The next one is basically, what are your main concerns about employers and those seeking sanctuary in Sheffield?
I probably don't know enough about kind of wider employment within the city to answer that effectively. I think in general, employment of people who've just gained status or have had status for a few years is difficult for all the issues I mentioned. And I imagine that's across the board. So in the private sector, in the public sector. But I probably don't know enough to go further than that.
Okay. I guess this year for me, I've had 2 young people.
Sorry, we've got a bit of an echo on your.
Oh, sorry.
Is that?
Is it mine?
I'm not sure, but it has. I think it has gone.
Has it gone?
Yeah.
Okay. What I was just basically saying there, 2 of the issues that I've come up with this year is when a young person actually reaches the age of 18. And then obviously going through the hurdle of trying to get all the paperwork, right to remain, etc. fear of being sent back home. And I guess that falls back to where you were saying in regards to them not being educated and knowing the systems and understanding the systems. I guess now we're kind of looking at the vulnerability and the rights. Asylum seekers, have fewer rights as a result of how vulnerable they are in Sheffield: employment, housing, education. We kind of fall into that kind of category, especially when they're so young as well. You also note the fragility of the voluntary organisations in Sheffield. What do you mean in regards to the voluntary organisations?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So I suppose with that, I'm talking about maybe using Assist as an example. Assist do a huge amount of work to support the people who've been refused asylum. Assist, like City of Sanctuary Sheffield, like South Yorkshire Refugee Law and Justice, like SAVTE, exist on a mixture of trusts and foundations funding, a bit of money from the council, some individual donations. A charity is lucky if it has a 1.5-year grace period before an impending cliff edge. Now, with that structure of funding, how are you ever going to plan for systemic change when you're just thinking about the next year? Yeah. And what often happens, I think, is that charities charities drift because they're just looking for the funding that they need to survive. So you end up not thinking about your strategic goals, not thinking about what you as an organization are there to do and achieve. You end up thinking about, okay, there's this pot of money that kind of wants me to do this and we kind of fit in it, so we'll move over to there. And then there's something over here, so maybe we'll move over to that, and you just get this piecemeal approach and no systemic change. I also think embedded in that is the inherent competitive nature of funding. So charities have to work quite hard to stand against that. It's almost like if you were just to fit in with the funding flow, you know, me and Craig would be fighting for the pot of money and we would be talking to each other. And that is the opposite of what we want to happen. So we as charities need to openly and honestly say, we're going for this pot of money. Do you want to join us on this? I know we'll both go for that. That's fine, but let's talk about it and think about it. And the system tries to stop you doing that.
Is that because they have to fit into certain categories?
Yeah, it's partly because you have to fit into certain bits to get the funding. It's also because there's a limited amount of funding, and you know, for every 10 organizations that go for a pot, one will get it. So it's inherently competitive.
Yeah, which is not really good. Looking in regards to sanctuary, are there any other examples of good practice in tackling inequalities and racism of those seeking sanctuary in Sheffield?
So one really positive thing about working in this movement for the rights of people seeking sanctuary is that there are loads of organisations doing really good work. So I've mentioned South Yorkshire Refugee Law and Justice, are another really good organisation. The British Red Cross are good. The Refugee Council, SAVTE, a really good organisation. And then there's loads of wonderful community organisations as well, doing lots of brilliant work. There's one called Adele, doing some fantastic work with people of colour in the city. So it is really encouraging because there is lots of good work going on, and all of that tackles issues faced by people seeking sanctuary. I don't know whether all of that, and I include myself in this, works towards systemic change in that area, or whether some of it is just a sticking plaster. And I include the work the City of Sanctuary do in that area as well. And we always need to consider, are we just putting a plaster on this, or are we actually challenging the system as it stands? And often you're doing both. You're supporting people in the short term, but also looking for long-term change. Yeah, does that answer your question?
I can hear that. I can hear the echo coming back, and I don't know why. Sorry about that. I'm just going to move on to the next question, basically, which is you talk about the need to end local and national policies that disproportionate impacts on asylum seekers and refugees. What advice do you think that you could actually give to the Race Equality Commission in writing of our report and recommendations to help with this?
So I think personally, the key thing is calling on organisations and institutions in the city to be bold in how we challenge national policy. Because the reality is we are bound by national policy in this area. You know, it's the Home Office that sets the agenda for asylum and immigration. And there is some things Sheffield can do independently, but not loads. And as a community, we need to be bold in saying that if we consider ourselves to be a place of sanctuary, a city of sanctuary, which I know many people in the council and in politics say a lot, if we consider ourselves to be that, then we need to actively and vocally stand against the inhumane and unworkable policies that are being doled out by the Home Office. And the new plan for immigration is coming over the hill, and it's, you know, it's worse than before, and already it was bad. But we need to have confidence as a city to stand up and say that we're not happy with this. And then it could be that it passes anyway because they have an 80-seat majority. And we'll have to do something, but we can still stand up and say this is inhumane and this is unworkable. And it has to come from the big institutions. It has to come from the council. It has to come from the hospitals. It has to come from the universities. And then the communities who are doing all of this work and on the coalface and seeing the impact of these policies, they're on board already. We're all already shouting for change, but it needs to be institutions that join that fight.
So definitely still some way to go. Okay.
But it is doable. I believe that Sheffield
Yeah,
is a city that can challenge these systems. You know, I really do believe it. And I also believe that cities, seemingly on a city level, there's a lot of support for improving the rights of people seeking sanctuary. It's just that no one's dipping their toe in the water. Sorry, everyone's dipping their toe in the water. No one's like charging in and actually saying what everyone says behind closed doors. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Tom. Let's hope, obviously, the report will make some great changes and movement anyway, at least. So now I'm going to speak to, is it Craig? Yeah. So the first question for Assist is, when people have been refused asylum, how do the issues raised by sanctuary become exacerbated?
So
can I just clarify that? So the issues that Tom's just been raised, that Tom has just been raising, how do they become exacerbated once people have been refused asylum?
Yeah. So people who come to Assist, they've been through this asylum process. Sometimes that's taken several years. It can be a very slow process. They will have made an asylum claim, it's been refused by the Home Office. They may have managed to make an appeal to an independent judge, or they may have not had an opportunity to make an appeal because they couldn't get a solicitor and so on. And then they're in the situation where they've been refused, they're suddenly evicted from the Home Office accommodation they were in before. They've had the £36 a week cut off. So they're now in the position where they're homeless, they've got no money whatsoever, no source of income, still not allowed to write to work. And we would see someone in this situation because they would, well, pre-pandemic, they would have come along to the drop-in centre where we operate we're there with partner organisations in Victoria Hall in the town centre. And so the people would then come to us to apply for support. Now we can support up to 90 asylum seekers at a time. And we put a limit on that because if we, there's a limit to the amount of support we can offer, but obviously the number of people who are in this situation are increasing all the time. So we could support a certain number of people with very basic, very minimal amount of money. It's £15 a week. And we may be able to offer some of them a place, a room in a shared house in one of the houses that we run. But in addition to, then they're stuck, so we would support people like trying to help them to get access to some legal advice so that they can investigate the appeal options if there are still appeal options available to them. But in addition to the fact that people are now destitute, reliant on charity for support, they're also living in fear of deportation. So because their claim has been exhausted, it means that all refused asylum seekers are people who are liable to deportation by the government. So they can be arrested at any moment. Most asylum seekers are required to report regularly to Vulcan House, which is the Home Office building in the centre of Sheffield. And sometimes people will go to report there, that they're supposed to report regularly just to say they're still around. And they can just be picked up then and sent to a detention centre. And people can be held in a detention centre quite legally in this country. You can be detained without having committed any offence, being charged with any offence, indefinitely with no release date. So they can be sent to any of these detention centres around the country, held detained indefinitely, sometimes for months. Quite often people are then just released again because the Home Office has discovered after detaining them for 6 months or 3 months that they actually can't return them to their country of origin because the country of origin won't accept them or because they don't have documents for them or something. So someone has been detained, no idea of a release date, several months, back on the street again, come back to us again. And this happens again and again and again. And, you know, if you can imagine the mental horror of that, you know, at least if you've been convicted of an offence, you know why you're in prison, you know how long you were going to be in prison, what your release date is. That doesn't apply. Those even basic kind of rights don't apply to refused asylum seekers.
Okay, thanks for that. How significant is this problem in Sheffield, would you say?
It's very significant everywhere. Every city has got, you know, substantial population of refused asylum seekers. No one knows exactly how many. I mean, we you know, estimate we have several thousand, just because we've been going, you know, since 2003, and you know, often we don't know what the end of people's journey is. Some people might have eventually returned home, or many people go have to go underground because they're stuck in this kind of limbo indefinitely. You know, they can't be returned home. In the case of Zimbabweans, for instance, I mean, there are, you know, tens of thousands of Zimbabweans have sought asylum in the UK over the last 20 years. Many of them have been refused, and Zimbabwe won't accept asylum seekers back again. Haven't done for, you know, for many years. And so all of those people who've been refused simply get stuck indefinitely in limbo. And so many of them end up disappearing. They might go to London or go to another city, or just end up disappearing into the, you know, the informal economy, trying to scrape a living however they can, always in fear of being picked up by the police, being deported, and so on. So nobody knows how many, but it is very significant. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest impact of that, I mean, it impacts on our city in all sorts of ways, but the biggest impact of it is borne by migrant communities themselves, because they're the ones who are the friends, relatives, you know, the community, have got the community links with people in this situation. And it has a huge, you know, financial, health, social impact on those whole communities.
Would you say 1 minute you're working with the family, then the next minute they've gone because of, you know, the papers have been refused, etc.?
We don't work with families, so families do have a right to support, continued support from the government because of the Children Act. Although I think that the new proposed plans under the new plan for immigration are intending to restrict that, and I've seen suggestions that the government's intending to forcibly separate children from their parents in order that they can make the parents homeless, which hasn't been the practice so far. So we work with adults, single adults, and yes, it's very much the case that you know, people can just disappear, very often just disappear, and often we don't know, you know, unless they choose to let us know, we wouldn't know what's happened to them. I mean, usually, you know, we do support people when they're reporting to the Home Office. So if someone is picked up and detained, then you know, hopefully we know about it and we could liaise with their solicitor and so on to see if there's anything to be done to get them out. But very often people, yes, are just gone, and we don't know where or why.
How has the COVID affected the work of ASIS?
Well, it's obviously, as with most, you know, organisations working in, you know, with marginalised communities, it's been incredibly difficult. Many of our services we've had to stop, so we had to close down our night shelter which was previously we were running a night shelter completely run by volunteers 5 nights a week for the people who we didn't have enough space for in our houses. We had to close that. We also had to close down our network of volunteer hosts who were accommodating people at the weekends and sometimes for longer periods. We also had to stop our in-person face-to-face advocacy work with clients, which we have recently started up again in a limited COVID-safe way. But the main sort of difference, and this is a silver lining in a way, over the period of the lockdowns, was that Sheffield Council did start to accommodate some refused asylum seekers under the everyone in policy that the government adopted towards for rough sleepers to ensure that local authorities could house them as a way of protecting public health during the emergency. So that meant that we were collaborating with the council. We were accommodating about 40 people at a time. The council were also accommodating some people in student accommodation and in hotels. And the feedback we had from the council was that actually they found that very much easier client group to work with, because few of our clients have got the kind of complex needs of the kind of the homeless population the council's used to working with. So they were able to accommodate them, and the problem, you know, the challenge facing us now is that in September last year, when the Home Office announced that they were going to, that the Home Office had also put a temporary stay on evicting people from their accommodation while they were in the asylum process during the pandemic. So there was a kind of a halt to people newly being made homeless during the pandemic. The Home Office has recently tried to restart evicting people from that accommodation when they get a negative decision or a positive decision. And the court has prevented that until the pandemic precautions are lifted. But what we're looking at is, at the moment, so far as we know, at the same time that the Home Office is going to restart evictions, the Sheffield Council is also planning to stop providing the accommodation that it's providing at the moment. And that means that there will be a considerable number of people who are going to be both evicted from Home Office accommodation and evicted from City Council emergency accommodation. They're going to come to us. We have not got any more capacity. We can't restart the night shelter. We can't restart our host network. So those people are going to become street homeless, or they're going to have to go to the migrant communities and have to sleep on their sofas, sleep on their floors. Again, put that burden back on those migrant communities.
I get kind of moving into the sort of the last question, but I'm going to combine them together to two, and it's just going to fall back into what you've just basically been saying. What safety nets are in place for those who've refused asylum, been refused asylum? And I guess that kind of falls into where you're saying if a city council are going to start banning the accommodations that they've been providing. Are some of these safety nets coming from informal, formal, community-based resources?
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, there is no safety net. You know, there's no safety net provided by, at the moment, the only safety net is provided by the council through the pandemic measures and through organisations like Assist and our partners who are supporting refused asylum seekers. If the city council decides to stop providing that safety net, then those people are going to be street homeless, or the only other option is they're going to have to rely on migrant communities who will be putting themselves at risk, further burdening already marginalized communities, and having a health, economic and social impact on those communities. And the one of the things which has come out of the pandemic is that there was a very important court case last year against Brighton and Hove Council, which found that local authorities do have the power to provide support for refused asylum seekers under the NHS Act. So this is a case, RTN versus Brighton and Hove Council, and it found that under the NHS Act, if the council judges that it's appropriate for addressing primary health needs, they can provide continuing support to people who would otherwise have no recourse to public funds. Now it's a power, not a duty. What I think is really important from a CIS point of view is to say that Sheffield City Council must not, absolutely must not, evict people into street homelessness, as soon as these pandemic measures are lifted. If they do that, it will have catastrophic consequences for our city. The previous networks from the voluntary organisations are not there to pick that up. So all of those negative impacts will fall on the most marginalised communities in our city, will have a direct racial impact on those racialised communities. And the council has the power to prevent that, because it can use that court judgment to recognise that it now has the power to continue to offer that basic safety net for people who would otherwise be homeless. And it must do that.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much for that. Definitely a lot of information, and really it's opened my eyes, definitely. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to pass you back to Professor Kevin Hilton to see whether anyone's got any further questions. But thank you ever so much, definitely.
Thanks, Ruth. Before I turn to my colleague Gulnaz, I'd just like to ask Tom. You've talked about the City Council response and kind of contribution to the partial safety net over the pandemic period. What are the hospitals and universities doing to contribute to the City of Sanctuary?
So there's the way the City of Sanctuary network works is there are lots of different streams of sanctuary, and one of those is universities of sanctuaries. Now, Sheffield Hallam, I think, has just had the University of Sanctuary status, and Sheffield University doesn't yet have it. I think it used to have it. This is only just to kind of highlight what Sheffield Hallam are doing in this space, which is they're running something called the Helena Kennedy Law Centre, which is supporting refugee reunion rights. They've got something called Sanctuary Scholarships, which are allowing asylum seekers to access higher education. And they've got some good foundation pathways into higher education. Now, I think their history as a polytechnic has given them a head start to other universities in having those pathways that allow people through and make access to higher education equitable. I don't know what Sheffield University are doing because I haven't had much contact with them. I think they could probably do more. And I think also both universities could add their voice to the movement, and that kind of links into what I was speaking to earlier. Within higher education, there are lots of policies that are part of the hostile environment, and kind of linked to what you were talking about, Ruth, with the young people turning 18. Often people will turn 18, realize they have unregular status, and then be unable to apply for university and be forced to pay foreign student fees, even though they were born in the UK, but they were just born into irregular immigration status, or they came over when they were very young. So I think that's an example of policies that are embedded into the system that are discriminatory, and universities should be challenging those policies. So I think that's probably one of the key areas that Sheffield's Uni and Sheffield Hallam could work on. In terms of the hospitals, I'm probably not massively qualified to say exactly what they could be doing or what they currently are doing. I think, again, they're caught in the wider net that both me and Craig mentioned, that access to secondary healthcare is denied for asylum seekers. And you end up with situations like a young man called Simba, who had a heart attack about 2 years ago. And having been given primary emergency care, he then woke up to a bill of over £100,000 for the secondary care he'd received. And there's an ongoing campaign called Justice for Simba, which I'd recommend the Commission has a look at. And hospitals, although they are bound by Home Office policy again, they could do more to stand against it. There's an organisation called Docs Not Cops and MedAct, who are both good organisations campaigning for change in this area. And on a kind of practical level, it's about all of those institutions looking at what they can actually do, because often they're hampered by the same thing that the council workers that I spoke about are hampered by, that fear of crossing the Home Office and crossing the hostile environment, because it's messy and it's dangerous if you do cross the line. But because of that, they never even go close to the line of what they're allowed to do. So I think they need to look at what they can actually achieve for people seeking sanctuary.
Thank you. Gulnaz, can I invite you to ask your question? Can you introduce yourself before asking your question, please?
Yeah, hiya Tom, it's Gulnaz from Further Community Hub, but I'm also a Race Commissioner. My question's based on, I've just been kind of listening very carefully to you and about the journey with clients that you actually receive through your service, which are asylum seekers. I just wanted to know, in terms of which agencies you work with in collaboration to assist the actual asylum seeker to gain status, such as good immigration solicitors, good legal advisors, to kind of keep a track on what exactly is going on, because I seem to kind of get the feeling that sometime along the line somewhere there's like the Sheffield City Council trying to evict these people, then at the same time they might be in between trying to get status. Do you have the people that you deal with, do you kind of advocate consistently and with them right through their journey towards an end goal? Can you see what I'm trying to say? What kind of role do you feeling pillow to put? Do people feel half the work has been done because you are a charity, you know, etc., etc.? Could you just elaborate on that? That's quite concerning to me.
Yeah, of course. So there's, and I'll speak pre-pandemic, because obviously during the pandemic it's become a bit messy, but pre-pandemic there was a relatively simple way into all of the support available. There was, people would arrive into dispersed accommodation in the city, so they're currently seeking asylum, and then they would go to the Mulberry Clinic, which is the GP clinic in the centre of town where everyone, asylum seekers, are registered. That would happen on a Wednesday. On the same day, there would be the drop-in at Victoria Hall. People would be walked from there by someone from City of Sanctuary Sheffield to the drop-in, and shown the sanctuary as well, which is round the corner, which we also facilitate. And through that, they would be able to access all of the services, or most of the services, city centre services in the city that would support them through the asylum journey. Now, the reality is it isn't one organisation walking with someone through the whole space. What happens is you've got lots of organisations doing lots of different things, and people will access all of that as they journey through the system. Now, it could be that in doing that, they are supported by one organisation more heavily than others. Or it could be that someone starts working with them and then they become their advocate for them. So they'll go to the city council with them, they'll go to the DWP with them, they'll go to a substantive interview and sit at the door with them. But it's not a kind of clear cut, you're walking with someone through the process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It just proves how much uncertainty there is, and lack of structure there is in this work. And I just want to find out more about ASSIST's role and what role do you play, and I've kind of gathered that.
I suppose, sorry, just one other thing to mention. I just remembered about your question about the legal support. There's a massive lack of legal support for asylum seekers in the process. So I suppose the difficulty is, as they walk through that process, solicitors are completely overstretched because the legal aid for asylum work has been reduced. So you'll end up with situations where you have young solicitors, you know, in their 20s with a caseload of 100, 200 asylum cases, and they're given a set amount for each asylum case, regardless of how much work they do on it. So what firms do is they take on loads of cases and they don't really do that much on them. And then the cases fail and then it goes to appeal. So I think there's that difficulty as well, that people walking through the process are not getting the right legal support that they need, and that cannot be provided by the council or by the voluntary community sector.
Thank you. That's really good for us to. Thank you so much. I'll just pass you back to Kevin, Professor Kevin.
Tom, can I just bottom out that legal aid point that you've just made? You say that there's a set amount allocated to these solicitors regardless of how much work they do. So who has oversight of the work they do and the quality of work that they do?
I don't know who has oversight. I think generally the power dynamic is that asylum seekers have absolutely zero power in the setup and the solicitors have all the power. So the asylum seekers are just waiting for their claim to be processed, and they don't have any engagement with the process. I imagine there's probably some kind of regulatory body that prevents law firms from, you know, completely riding roughshod over the system. But the reality is we've seen people going through the system not getting the right legal support, and solicitors being very difficult to contact as well, because they have such a huge caseload.
Okay.
I wonder, there's another organisation called South Yorkshire Refugee Law and Justice, who works specifically on people who've been refused asylum getting evidence together for a new appeal, and they're far more in tune with the intricacies of the legal system and the failings of it. So they might be worth contacting.
So I think it's worth turning to them. It's well worth us turning to them just to get an answer to that question. Tom, I'm given the time, Tom and Craig, I think we will have to draw this. Sorry, could everyone? Right, thank you, Winston. So yeah, we'll have to draw this session to a close, but I feel that we could quite easily have sat and drilled down even further for another hour to talk through these issues. So if you feel as though there are areas that perhaps you would like to talk to us more about, can I leave the door open for you both? If you wish to get in touch with us, or if you want to send us anything, we'd happily take that, because you did say earlier on, Tom, that there was some additional evidence that you would like to table, and you shared it with us already. So if that's it, then that's fine. But just if you can keep the dialogue open with us, that would be fantastic, both of you. And we really do commend you on the work that you're doing, and thank you very much for your attendance today. So we have Adam with us. Okay, hi Adam again.
Hello, hi Professor.
Hi Adam. And are you being joined by? Yeah.
I've sent him the link, Ismail Yusuf.
Yes. Okay. Super. Welcome, Ismail. You're on mute, Ismail. We won't hold it against you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for letting me.
Okay. So welcome, Adam, Ismail, Shahid, and Rob. It's good to see you. Before we get and also thanks to Rob and Adam for coming back. We'll talk a bit more about that once we get through a bit of housekeeping. So if I can just introduce you to Adele Robinson, who leads the Secretariat. She'll just take us through some of the preliminaries. Adele?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to just take you through a bit of context about the Commission before we start. The Commission is an inquiry into the nature, extent, causes and impact of race inequality and racism in Sheffield. The Commission was established to look at 6 key themes. Those are health, education, civic life and communities, business and employment, crime and justice, and sport and culture. And today is the first day of the Civic Life and Communities hearing. At the culmination of all of the hearings, there will be a final report submitted for action to key stakeholders in Sheffield. As invited guests today, you'll be asked to share your knowledge in relation to the terms of reference of the Commission, covering 5 key areas. These areas are racial inequality and racism in Sheffield, which you feel may be of use to the Commission, knowledge of others or your own frameworks in relation to race-related duties, any analysis of the causes of racism or racial inequality within your sector, any examples of good practice in relation to reducing racism or racial inequality, and what you believe would be the best way to tackle racism and racial inequality within the city. Witnesses to the Commission are required to act in good faith, and by appearing here today, we're assuming that you are so. For those in attendance, this hearing is being recorded and will be available on the Commission's website at some point in the future, and any papers that you've submitted that are non-confidential will also be made available on the Commission's website. Can all those in attendance wait for an invitation from the Chair before speaking? And can Commissioners and invited guests please introduce yourself before speaking? And for Commissioners, can you use the chat function and send me any questions that you have in that, and I'll send them on to the Chair. And now can I hand you back to the Independent Chair, Professor Kevin Hilton. Thank you.
Thanks Adele. To all our 4 guests, welcome. Before I introduce our commissioners who I will invite to ask questions, I wonder if I can ask you to introduce yourselves and to introduce your submissions. Rob, I'm not asking you to do this because you've already done this previously. So actually, Rob, the reason why we invited you to this session is so that you could reflect on some of the things being said. So there's not a specific thing that we're asking you, Rob, but we're just going to bring you in and out of the conversation if you're happy with that. The PMC and ISRAC have submitted evidence. So I wonder if Shahid, you could say something about yourself and your position with the PMC, and whether or not you were involved in writing the submission. Right. But if you could say a bit about the submission, yeah, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everyone. My name's Shahid Ali. I'm a board member of the Pakistan Muslim Centre. Apologies for my fees. Unfortunately, fortunately for him, he's teaching at the college today and he couldn't get out of it. So he's asked me to come in his stead. I was part of sitting down and writing this submission with the fees and Muhammad Ali, our chair. And basically it was more about what's been happening these last sort of decade or so in the city, and us as an organisation. We've been around for over 30 years now, 40 years. And in the building that we're in, that's been there since the late 80s that we've been in there. Since day one, we've had a number of issues. I mean, I was a child when the PMC was sort of taken over and run by the community. I've grown up with the place. Now I'm in my 40s. I'm on the board of the organisation, and we find it difficult. We find it very difficult to run as an organisation due to lack of funding, due to lack of support from within the city of Sheffield, from within the council, especially over the last 6 years or so, 6-7 years. We've had no funding from the council, no support from the council in any initiative that we've run or wanted to run. We've always been there for any, where the council, it might not be council led, but where there were any issues in the city, whether that be things like possible riots that were happening, whether it be about any community issues, we were there. We represented our community to the best of our ability. We run primarily on volunteers. We have a few members of staff who work part-time hours. We try and self-generate as much income as we can through renting parts of our site to generate money. We have got a few small grants over the years, but primarily we've not had much funding from anywhere. This last year we've been okay. I say we've drawn down some funding, but it's the council, unfortunately, who we really want to work with, who we've been desperate to work with over the years, has really kept us at arm's length over this time. And even over the last year, we've really struggled to engage the council. We've struggled to engage the commissioners in the council. There was a public health group that was set up led by Sarah Hepworth.
Hey, can I just stop you there? We'll get into that.
That's fine.
In a short while. Have you said enough about just generally about the submission? Is there anything that you'd like?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much it tells you a bit about the history of the PMC, the submission, and how we've got to it. One of the things that we've been successful in developing has been our Federation of Mosques, which we host as an organisation, and that's bringing together the majority of the mosques in Sheffield and parts of Rotherham as well, and different parts of South Yorkshire, and bringing them together on one platform. And from that platform, we've done a number of things, whether it be fundraising for charities, whether it be making collective decision making with issues that are going on actually within Sheffield or across the country. And yeah, we've unfortunately that's not being used to best of its, in our experience, to what it could be used for. And, we've had a number of people who've come along from the council around. There was the funders that came along from, I think it's through central government. We were promised some funding because we wanted to work with the mosques in looking at making that a bit more of a formative structure. And unfortunately, the help and support didn't come through. We see that as a fantastic opportunity. Well, we see it as a fantastic opportunity to engage a really wide and large community, especially the Muslim community, which is very diverse across the city. But we are doing it with very little or no resources in the best of how we can. Yes, yeah. I mean, I'll carry on with loads of things later.
Well, okay, we'll come back to you. And Rob, I did get your note. And Adam, can I ask you to speak to the evidence that was submitted for ISRAC? So we're not the BEMA stuff right now. It's the ISRAC.
Thank you, Professor Kevin. Thank you for the clarification. I'm wearing ISRAC hats now, so I'm very clear.
That's right.
Yeah, nice to meet the panel once again. I think, yes, myself, Ismail, Professor Jeff Green, and Suzanne did write this submission evidence.
Yes.
And I think in the submission evidence, we've got 10 points in a 2A4 size page. So I think it's 10 issues that we've raised. And each issue that we've raised, we constructively put a recommendation, because it's very easy just to be a critique but we thought we should also have the recommendation. Whether the recommendation is taken on board, it's not a matter for us, but at least we're being positive to give our view how things should be addressed. So that's how we approach our evidence submission with the recommendation. Having said that, although it's 10 points, as I'm sat here, I think the list could grow. I think the only points that I want to include in the discussion will be lack of engagement by the local authority, public health and VAS. I will also include core services. Funding has been withdrawn for voluntary sector. And finally, I want to put one point regarding assets, because some of us own the assets and some of us and lease or rent the assets from the local authority. It's a very old listed grade 2 building. So I just wanted to touch upon that in terms of infrastructure funding. So I think in a context, those are the key points with recommendations.
Yes. Thank you. We'll come back to you in a second, Adam. Rob, just a quick one. When we had the first health hearing, we discussed the Sadaka evidence at that point, but in relation to health. So would you like to say more broadly in terms of in relation to civic life and communities?
Yeah, obviously, I didn't hear the other Rob's submission, but one of the things that I wanted the Commission to be aware of, and I have in the past tried to put this across to Sheffield City Council, is that in some ways, Sadaka is an exceptional case in an exceptional building, in that the building that we occupy, along with the private rented business on the ground floor, it's all one building. And so some years ago on re-signing a lease, previous boards re-signed a lease, they signed a full repair lease. Now, I understand that is standard for many organisations. The only difference for Sadaka, which is quite unique, is that we are responsible for keeping a building in a state of repair, for fit for purpose, and especially the roof, which meanders in all different directions. That if we don't keep that to a state of repair, then, as has happened in the past, the roof will leak into the ground floor units, of which we don't have a responsibility for. And so that's left us in quite a disadvantaged position. I would also say, a discriminatory position, because it can't be our responsibility to maintain a building that the council collects rent from for the other private business below. So that certainly is one of the areas that I would like to have drawn out here in the way that I believe that we have been treated very differently to other organisations.
Yeah. Just before I hand over to my colleague Sarah, can I just ask you, Rob, and it might be quite delicate, but why did you sign that agreement to do the full repairs?
Well, the current board didn't sign that. This came around 5 years before I became chair. I believe that lease is around 10 years old. And to be honest, I'm not sure why they signed it. And I'm not sure what advice, whether legal or otherwise, that they took to sign it. But certainly, the legal department and the properties department, Sheffield City Council, knew of the, let's say the differential lease that they were about to sign, because they've got a whole legal department, a whole properties department. We don't possess that kind of expert knowledge at City Council. I doubt we would have had a surveyor come in, or a legal advisor that we would have had acting on our behalf. And having looked at the lease, it's very complex. I'm educated to master's level, and there are just parts of that lease that I just can't understand, because it's all legal speak, it's property speak, and you have to be an expert in that field to understand everything that you're signing in a lease. and I don't believe that we had that kind of expertise. But the council certainly knew what they were doing in encouraging us and putting that on the table in the first place.
And have you gone back to them, and have they been sympathetic, or have they stuck to their guns in terms of it's a legal document and you have to adhere to it?
When I have presented this to the council on a number of occasions with at least 5 different councillors and officers, I've almost been made to feel that I should be grateful that I'm still in the building and that, you know, we're getting some kind of support from the council, which it doesn't, it's not in terms of financial. And when I have put it to them that this kind of lease is almost, it's almost complicit in some of the failings of the organisation, they think I'm being ungrateful. So no, there hasn't been any no sympathy at all in that regard. In very recent times, having had further conversations with another councillor, there has been some talk as to how that ought to be changed and how the council ought to be taking responsibility for the upkeep of the building, certainly the exterior of the building, like Israq's building. Ours is a grade 2 listed building as well. But we've had some tentative talks, but nothing's been acted on as yet. And so as we stand, I as chair of SADAC am responsible to make sure that that roof is watertight. So Martin's and the barbers and the takeaways and the electric shop can all continue with their daily business. And it still beggars belief how we could possibly be responsible for that. But that's the situation that we have.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that background, Rob. I'd like to bring my colleague Sarah Ahmed in to ask you all a few questions. Sarah, could you introduce yourself before proceeding?
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Ahmed. I work at St Sophia Sheffield as the new neighbourhood engagement project worker. I am also a youth worker in Burngreave area for Ellesmere Youth Project and also the lead youth worker for Brumhall Girls Youth Group. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for taking this time out to talk to us. Shahid, am I all right to start off asking you? You've already said a bit about how your relationship with the City Council is in regards to how they support you with funding, but can you just elaborate a little bit more, and also with other key voluntary and community organisations in it, how it's supported with funding over the time that you've been there, and community activities as well?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sarah. I mean, in my opinion, I think there's been a lot of issues where, you know, there's been a lot of political influence used, I'd say, within the council, and that's been used as an excuse by officers not to engage with people like us. You know, we eventually bought the building off the council, where many organisations and many other places were given over to as a community asset to community-run led groups. We've had to buy outright, I think, 250,000, 300,000 pounds. We've had to raise and buy out the building to make sure that we keep it. The building was in a state, it was a very poor state of affairs. It still is, because it's an old school, built in the 1890s. We still run on oil-fired heating. You know, we're trying to upgrade bits and bats as much as we can, but because we've only had at least last 5-6 years, it's taking time for us to do that, because to put in for funding bids, we need to have money in the bank as well to draw down funding, which we haven't got, unfortunately. So I mean, I mean, just an example, through COVID, right at the start of COVID, I engaged with a commissioner in the council to talk about how we could help and support, and what we were already doing off our own backs, because we were giving out cooked meals to people who were isolating or who couldn't get out of their homes. In the course of over 6 months, we gave over 8,000 meals, cooked meals, to families, individual meals, that is, to individuals and families. Whether we had a volunteer kitchen running, but we weren't engaged in any formal way. Yeah, there was always, we were put in touch with people who had kitchens running, etc. But it was always, there's always a barrier there that you haven't got X, Y, Z in place, so we can't really work with you. But even then, we would always talking to the council bodies, the managers, to say, look, we're here to help the community in the best way we can. We're trying to do that with our own community, in a very isolated way, and we think we have done. We've done a lot of positive work within our own community, but sadly, that hasn't been taken on by the council. That's not been supported by the council. Obviously, the public health group was set up by Sarah Hepworth and Shahid Ali, and we worked as best as we can through them. We've fed intelligence back through them as well. Where we've had the opportunity, we've engaged with. But historically, over a number of years now, we have had, we've invited councillors, and we've had events in the community where we've invited people from the council in just to say, look, we hold something here. We get hundreds and hundreds of people from within the community coming to our events. This is a ready resource for us to engage with. Give us the tools to do that, enable us to do that. And unfortunately, we've not been supported. There's that many structures in this city, unfortunately, that have sprung up over years who control large amounts of money and where it goes and what's delivered. I see ourselves as a infrastructure organization, with a BAME infrastructure as an organization. We have our own building, we have our own projects, we have been running for years and decades now. I'd say last decade we've had very little funding to actually run, but we are running the best way we can. We've got a fantastic core of volunteers who are keeping it running. Even if the little bit of funding that we do get, the £10,000 a year from here there, even if we don't get it, we'd manage to keep it going, and we'll run it. We'll find out ways and means. We have to put money out of our own pockets to pay the bills. We'll keep it open and running for the benefit of the community. But yeah, this last year has shown the disparities between organisations who have developed over the last decade, I'd say, the likes of, or who the council sees as core infrastructure organisations in the city, in the voluntary sector, such as you have Shire Community Forum, you have Marion Castle Development Trust, you have SOAR, you have down in Netherthorpe, that'll come to me again. And you also got people like Donald Wellbeing as well, who take on the large amount of funding that comes into the city and get distributed between themselves. And then they come, and I've seen this in a number of smaller projects where they take the money for the BAME community as well, and then they'll go to smaller BAME projects who are desperate to run their programs and give them a bit of money to run a small program to enable them to get funding down. Get a small organisation can do a lot with £10,000 or £5,000. It will get them the numbers and the outputs that they require. But that's actually that you're doing a disservice to the community, where the money that had come in had probably been about £50,000, and you've top sliced it, you've taken money out, and then you give the little bit that to the local community to actually deliver something. You're not building infrastructure, you're not supporting organisations to stand on their own feet. We're too busy running and delivering, rather than sitting back and looking at how we can make our organisations better, how we can make ourselves stronger, how we can develop, make sure we get heating in, make sure the water isn't leaking, making sure that our roofs are done. It takes so much time and effort. I know us as a board, we're putting in probably 30 hours a week of our own time in to actually, sorry, can I just pause for 30 seconds? I think my son's is knocking the door downstairs.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's happened to all of us at some point. But perhaps you could turn to Sarah. You could turn to Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Hello.
just the same question really, what has been your relationship like with the City Council and other key voluntary and community sector organisations in how they supported in funding and community activities that you deliver?
Thank you, Sarah. And I will also want to say, before I give a response to that, I want to say, if Ismail can come in if there's any gaps that I'm missing, because I want to give Ismail the opportunity to also and contribute. But my answer to your question is I echo everything my PMC Shahid have just said on in the broader context. But for Israel, we want to be very specific for this exercise so that you have the specifics, tangible issues that we're talking about rather than the broad aspect, which and my colleague has touched upon. In our submission, in the evidence of submission, as the trustee of Israel, we sat down constructively and looked at the heading of issues where we felt we've been discriminated against. What are the projects? What are the issues? What is the recommendation of each heading? So I think it will be better, because the time we've spent on this 2A4 to be constructive, I think we should go through it rather than just to give you a broad response. So in our submission, which you have copy of, number 1, it says lunch club. These are the specific, tangible, what we can say. We even have the paper trail, if you like, the emails and all the backup information, so that we're not just accusing the local authority for discrimination. We have something to back it up in terms of evidence. And I think hence that's why we are trying to do this exercise. So the lunch club is a typical example. We've had lunch club in Israel for many years, and Israel has been in existence for 30 years as a charity. We were established back in the 85, 87 as a registered charity organization. And since then, we've been up and running. At one point, there was 40 members of staff working at Israel, and then recently, none. So lunch club, as an example, we've been running our lunch club for the last 8 years, where the lunch club, the facility that we have, is for the elderly, unemployed, people who have mental health problems, who have social problems, come there for having coffee and having a hot meal for the day. And then not only are they coming for the lunch club, when they come to Israel, they walk through that door. When they have lunch or when they have tea or coffee in our premise, they come with letters that they've received. And some of them don't speak English, and therefore they need someone to read the letter for them and then do the follow-ups and ring the services and advocate on their behalf. So lunch club, if you like, is just an attraction. But once they walk into there, they come with multiple issues, which we are there to help them and support them and cater for them. So the question becomes, who funds the lunch club? The lunch club is self-funded by Israel. We subsidize it through our little funds that we have. So, and it's open 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. So if you come to Israel from 10 o'clock up to 4 o'clock, the core hours, and lunch club is very busy. You'll have lunch club. We have a prayer area. We have a lot of other activities going around there. So a couple of years ago, we took initiative and said, okay, we've now established the lunch club. We wanted to apply for funding. We've contacted the local authority and they sent us to VAS, Voluntary Action, because there is a voluntary sector liaison team, which works between Sheffield City Council and the VAS. So we were thrown, go to VAS. When you go to VAS, they will say, no, we are here just to give you advice. But if you need funding, go back to Sheffield Local Authority. You go back to Sheffield Local Authority, they listen to you, you just become like a bing bong. You're just thrown from one pillar to the post. Having said that, we pinned them down. And then at the end, they said, VAS have to visit your lunch club. So a member of VAS and a member from the Sheffield Local Authority, and I think based at Morfoot, I can't remember their names, came to visit us. And they sat with us, saw our lunch club, and said, how do you run your lunch club? So, okay. At the end, they said, we want to give you advice. And we said, okay, what advice are you giving us in relation to lunch club? And they said, maybe you eat too much meat. You're spending more money and than what you're getting. You're spending more for staff, for purchasing the food, and maybe you're not breaking even. Okay, and then we said, okay, so what advice are you going to give us? Maybe you need to stop buying meat. Meat is expensive and fish is expensive. Maybe you need to look health and well-being, vegetables. So at the end, when you pin it down to the nitty-gritty, instead of resourcing us for the lunch club that we've established and support us and nurture us, they're coming to say, give up your meat and fish. And we said, we Somalis are nomadic. We love our meat. We're not going to give that no matter what. Are you going to fund the services that we want? We are not here for you to come and give it. Because what you have to understand, although I'm making it in a humor way, some of these single people with mental health and the elderly who are living in these council flats do not have one decent meal. So when they come to Israel and have a hot meal, which is a hot soup, a hot meat and soup, this gives them the kind of food that they're used to. And that can keep them for the day until tomorrow when they come during the day. And some of them have mental health problems. Some are disabled. Some are elderly, frail elderly who have no wife, no children, have lived here 50 years, worked in the steel industry, have retired in their 70s, 80s living. So the only social place they come as the focal point is Israel. And therefore, that is why it's so important for us to keep that going, the hot meal. And yet the local authority and with VAS are advising us to give out the fish and the meat that we love and which we're not going to give for no matter what, whether they give us the funding or not. So the point is, they did not resource us. And they walked away and they said, we are giving you advice, take it or leave it, and that's it. And then I never gave up. We never gave up. We kept on writing to them emails and they kept on just responding to us. So at the end, in the recommendation, having put our context there and saying, now we have a Syrian chef and our food is very diverse, all the people in the area have it. So in terms of recommendation, when we spoke to the other Black organization and we found out they were in the same predicament as us. So, and then I looked at the local authority website for lunch clubs, and I came to realization that the Black organizations were not funded from the grant aid or the grant and from the local authority. So it wasn't just only the Somali community, most of the Black organizations are funding. So in our recommendation, having put the context there, we are asking Sheffield City Council to review the percentage of funding allocated to Bema community groups. That's number one. And number two, to take an affirmative action. So for the commissioners to investigate over the last couple of years, how many Black organizations have been funded from this pot of money. So that is on the lunch grab with the specifics. So I now bring Ismail if he wants to say anything.
Ismail, welcome.
Thanks, Professor Kevin. Thanks, Adam. I think I don't have to say anything about lunch club. It's been done, I think, and I also echo what Adam has said with regard to the lunch club and the process we have done and the feedback we are getting from the VAS as well as from the local authority. I think the second item on the list we are talking about is community infrastructure levy, SIL funding. SIL funding is a big issue for the Bami communities in general, and specifically within the Somali community, which has got the big building here. We bought it from the council 5-6 years ago, and it is the community contributed buying the building and paying the cost and membership contribution towards the members. Before we bought the building, the council told us to leave the building because it's too costly for the council. And they asked us to move out and maybe get a small room either from Sharo Forum building or somewhere else. So they cannot fund anymore and sustain the building the way it is. So the community went together, they came together and they decided to buy the building and put the money towards the cost of buying the building. The community members got a lease from the council, 6 years lease, and with the help of some people actually from the council and not from the council, from the community members. Once we bought that building, the building being transferred to us, which needed a lot of repairs, and so it's a listed grade 2 building being asked to move in and to manage all the running costs, utilities, repairs, and everything. To manage the building itself is difficult, rather than managing the activities and running the activities for the community. So that became difficult for us, and we applied community infrastructure levy, because in the area there are a lot of student accommodation, a lot of new buildings, and there is a big amount of money coming to the council from this and people who are building this area. We contacted the Sheffield City Council, we contacted our local councillors. We have got a trail of endless meetings, endless emails saying that, oh yeah, we'll come back to you, we'll check the system, we don't know what's going to happen, and still up to date from today, we haven't received a penny of those infrastructure levy, which was given to the council. And I think it is a huge amount of money which is given to the council and nothing being given to it. And at the end, in fact, because of this way we were going through the system and going through the local councillors in the area, and we put also the recommendation is at the end, which saying that the process and how we felt about it, which says that the process, clear guidelines on the timeline of still funding, because one say we'll get back to you, second say, oh, we don't have any guidelines of how to distribute the still money. And the whole BAME community, all the buildings, like, if you check the DMC, if you check all the buildings, they don't have any fund, they don't have any still funding. So where this money, where the council is giving this money then? Where is it going? It's a question we need to ask the Race Equality group to think about how this money, how this funding is distributed within the BAME community. And Israel is one of them, which has not been distributed and supported from this money, which is huge. We're talking about the millions here. We're not talking about thousands given from, and that's given to the council. And that's all I say for this item on this.
Yes, thank you, Isabel. Sorry, if I could just interject. Yeah. Rob, could you just comment on your experience of funding and the funding environment, given what Shahid and Ismail and Adam have said already?
That to me, Kevin.
Rob, yes.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, well, I'd like to contradict Adam and Shahid, but I can't, because this is really a familiar pattern. Unlike PMC and ISRAC, Sadaka is yet to be given the opportunity to own its building. And out of all the organisations, we've been there the longest. We got the keys to Sadaka on Wicker in 1985. We've been council tenants since 1985. And when I have in the past tried to approach, well, not tried, I have approached the council. In 2016, I was given assurances that if we get our house in order, that we would be given the opportunity to acquire the building. Whilst we were working towards getting our house in order, again, like Shahid said, we met, I don't know, a wall of defiance, if you like, from council officers mainly, civil servants at Town Hall, who were just basically blocking us from getting information that we needed. We were told that we had debts to the council. And whilst we wanted to sort our debts out, of which we have, and whilst we wanted to honour all the debts that we had, I asked the council for carbon dated invoices for outstanding rent. That was the main thing that we were behind. I asked for this information in 2017, again in 2018, as we prepared for a CVA, which was finalised in 2019. I am still waiting for those carbon dated invoices. But nevertheless, we had to account for quite a lot of money that we allegedly owed to the council. That's one issue. And as Shahid has already said, the other issue is this city it's had a lot of funding thrown its way. Yes, we've been dealing with cutbacks and we've been dealing with austerity. But the Sun Fund, for example, is worth millions. Community infrastructure levy. There's millions and millions of that money in Sheffield for organisations like the ones who are represented today. But in trying to get access to that fund, it's like being, I can only compare it to being like a circus animal, where you stand in the big ring, you know, and you're talking to the master, if you like, or you're communicating with the master, and the master says, jump through this hoop. When you get through that hoop, we'll have another conversation. And I don't know how many hoops that we've jumped through, you know, on the hope that we'll get a little crumb at the end of jumping all through these hoops. At the end of the day, they give you a little bit of water, and then the next day, you've got to jump through the same hoops. Because we have approached the council direct at the Soul Fund, councillors. We've also approached our green councillors who are responsible for it in an area that we're in geographically. And I don't know the brother's name there, I forgot his name, who just gave me a Vincent. He just says Interaction Centre for his titles. Sorry, brother. But exactly as he said, every time you ask a question, they ask you to jump through a hoop. Unfortunately for us, if we don't jump through the hoops, then we get told that, well, you didn't engage, you didn't respond, you didn't reply. So we keep jumping through the hoops. A similar situation with some of the organisations that do attract some good funding in this city. You know, VAS has been a big thorn in our side until recent times. You know, since Black Lives Matter and post George Floyd's murder, VAS have been around the table with us and they want to talk. But prior to that, it was almost impossible to have a conversation with them about anything, any project that we were trying to run. The council, I think, in some ways were, I'd have to say, in cahoots with this, because once we, as a group of Black organisations, there was a group of us. It was the BAME COVID-19 group, but BAME or BAME is not a term that I recognise anymore that describes me, and so therefore I'll only do it in acknowledgement there, and I won't use that term anymore. The term that I prefer to use is Bantu, which is that ancient African term for people. Just people. So, you know, we're not BAME, we're not black, as far as I'm concerned, or coloured, or any of those social engineering terms. It's just about us being Bantu. But when that group said to the council, look, we've had enough of this disengagement with VAS, and we're not going to engage with them anymore, even though they had this funding for, for projects post COVID-19, when all those disparities were exposed. And it was having to have this cross conversation with the council, saying to the council, we're not engaged with them anymore, that the council said to VAS, we understand, that they had to approach us again and basically get around the table. In this past 15 months, VAS have been very different to the previous, I don't know how many years. Yeah. And one of the big examples of this is something that actually blew up late last week in Sheffield. Whilst SEDACA and a number of other BAME organisations, and a project that I'm personally working on in my capacity as chair of SEDACA with the University of Sheffield, whilst we had our Windrush celebration applications rejected, some of that money came into Sheffield City Council, and Sheffield City Council, in their wisdom, decided that they would give some of that funding to an organisation called Ignite Imaginations. Well, they certainly ignited imaginations on social media because people went crazy, that people exposed that this was virtually a white organisation, all their staff are virtually white, or their management board is virtually white, but the council gave them the funding rather than the BAME COVID-19 group, but I'm sorry, not a number of Black organisations, and decided also not to give it to a project jointly led by the University of Sheffield and SEDACA. but they gave it to a larger white organisation. The backlash has been such, so just last week, it ended up on the front page of the Star. The backlash has been such that Ignite Imaginations have now offered to give the money back to Sheffield City Council and asking the City Council to have another rethink. On top of that, they are encouraging people to come forward for an expert panel to help them to change some of the ways that they organise their business. So hats off to Ignite Imaginations. But you have to ask yourself the question, why in June 2021, post Black Lives Matter, post all the inequalities that COVID-19 has only brought to the fore, the thing that we've been talking about for decades in this country have just now been recognised, and people are, I'll have to say, allowing us to have a conversation now about these inequalities and about the deprivation, about the poverty, about the health poverty, as well as everything else. You have to ask yourself why Sheffield City Council would even begin to think that this was a good idea. And so one of the things that we think from Sedaka, one of the things that we think will go towards changing this ridiculous situation that we have in Sheffield is a conversation with the decision makers, and it's quite ironic to say with the leadership of this city, because one of the problems that we have in this city, in Town Hall, is that we don't have leaders. We're not being led anywhere in this city. And whilst there's been some significant changes, I'm not saying it's utopia anywhere else, but there's been things happening post-COVID-19 in London, in Bristol, in Birmingham, in Manchester. In Sheffield, we're still talking. And that's not this Race and Equality Commission, putting that aside, you know, this is still relatively new, and I know the vast amount of work that you're getting through on a daily basis. It is amazing, but we're still just talking in Sheffield, where we could be taking actions, because that is what's going to change. And so I think another conversation I need to be a part of with ISRAC and with PMC is about how we put political pressure on, about us understanding that we are the swing vote in this city. And many major cities and towns, you know, the non-white vote is the swing vote. And we have got to start engaging in a different way as we did before. You know, we've got to get away from that paternalistic partnership, if you want to call it that kind of engagement. And we've got to start asking different questions in a different way that will lead to change. Some of the things that we're doing, you know, like ISRAC, you know, when we were being supported by the council, Sedaka had around 30 staff, fully paid, you know, doing a range of things around care, around education, adult education programs too, youth programs, you know, 30 staff being paid. Right now, we're just down to volunteers. We're down to people who are putting in excess of 40 hours a week. We have one young man who works in our reception, and he's putting in at least 8 hours a day, as well as some evening work. 5 days a week, he's doing that. We've got people, you know, working in the daycare centre, working in our central functioning office in Sedaka, putting in excess of 40, 50 hours a week. We are surviving by putting our own hands in our own pockets. Sorry?
I think what's come clear already through PMC and ISRAC and Sedaka is the value of volunteers, you know, and the over-reliance on volunteers.
Well, absolutely, and that is a problem in and of itself. Yeah, you know, it's a great way to get your to cut your teeth in community and voluntary sector. And one of the other issues is that when we have to engage with other voluntary sector organisations, I'm always around the table with people who are getting paid. I'm in a voluntary capacity, you know, giving off. I see Shahid smiling there because he recognises that, and I'm sure Adam does as well. You know, we have to sit around the table with colleagues from VAS or SOAR or Zest or whatever. They're getting paid decent salaries, and you know, we're just making the numbers up. It's a real issue in this city, and that is something else that needs to be looked at.
So before, sorry, Adam, before going back to Sarah, can I just go back to Shahid, whose son obviously has sorted himself out and so on. You wanted to follow on, I'm guessing.
Yeah, thank you.
And then Adam, if you can come in after that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. It's really, I really wanted to end with what I was talking about, and I was going to go into a specific issue that I've had over the last year, similar to Olivia, similar to Rob as well. For me, it was the Healthy Activities Fund that was in Sheffield and administered through VAS, Voluntary Action Sheffield. Like Rob said, VAS never engaged us for years and years until last year. And our engagement with VAS started primarily when the email went out from the chief exec at that time around the Healthy Activities Fund to say, oh, great, we've got this £1 million coming to the city. It'd be great to get people engaging their local communities, especially young people. How can we do this together? So me, I thought, great, you know, I emailed back straight away saying, fantastic, we would love to be involved. I was told, your PMC, your local lead is Manor Castle Development Trust, and I run a local cricket club in Shire Nether Edge, and I was told for that is Shire Community Forum. So with both hats on, I went to both organisations, and now Manor Castle, I think it's Diane or Debbie who was the lead there. She was fantastic, to be honest with you. She went, yeah, okay, we're in a bit of a pickle because we've already given all the money out, but there may be some money for you to deliver what you want to deliver. So we want to deliver at PMC like a mini summer school program, because we'd had a lot of parents tell us that they were fearful that their children were going to not be able to do their learning, you know, especially those who are going to sit GCSEs the next year and A levels. So we put on some classes. We got local teachers involved. We were expecting 30 kids. We had 60 kids turning up on a weekend for 3-4 hours each Saturday, 3-4 hours on the Sunday, and we gave them food and everything. And thankfully, that was done well in partnership with Manor Castle, to be honest with you. But with the cricket club, when I've asked the Shire Community Forum about money for my cricket club to run cricket in the area, they turned around and said, oh, it's great to hear, Shahid, but unfortunately we've given all our money out. And all I wanted was about £3,000 to run a full summer programme with local kids in this area. So I shared my disappointment with Shire Community Forum at that time, tell them, look, I don't think it's on. Can I ask you who you give money to? And they named groups like Family Voice, Ignite Imaginations again, and a few others. And my response to that was, can you tell me which of those groups engage young people that are in this area, in this sort of, you got the Somali community over at Broome Hall, you got the South Asian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi community in Shire Nether Edge. Which of these groups actually engage these people, these young kids at that level? None of them. I eventually got some funding from directly from VAS for this, because I put a complaint in, and that's when VAS started. And then at the evaluation of that all, you look at what you delivered and what you got. We delivered over in excess of 50% of what we were required to do so, while people like Ignite Imaginations couldn't deliver anything, which I told them at the start, they're not going to be able to deliver online classes of arts and crafts or whatever they want to do. They said they had to actually leave the area and go and work in Upperthorpe, where they already had contacts and smudged some numbers together. But it's following on from that. You see, we've had a lot of talks with VAS and about how we move together, how we work together, how the BAME organizations are actually involved in decision making. And for me, I think we're still being kept at a very big distance, because all of a sudden this new model was developed. This new model was developed where every organization was going to be part of. I refused to entertain it. I said, look, we're volunteers. We can't keep turning up to meeting after meeting after meeting where you want us to tick boxes and that's it all the time. And I know there are others here who signed up to that, and we as PMC refused to sign up to that. And I still maintain that until we see tangible outcomes happening somewhere, I'm still very suspicious of the processes and the structures in this city, even though we've had a good 15, 16 months of people running around like headless chicken thinking that there's going to be change because of Black Lives Matter and, you know, we have to do things better, it's not acceptable. But the structures are still there, maybe in a different way, maybe in a different form. You know, we've got Healthy Activities Fund has come around again this year. Yeah, we've not heard it. You know, the money's still going to the same organizations. It's still going through the same process. There's no, you know, we see ourselves, I mean, we've started, I know Rob said about the BAME stuff, but we started the BAME 5, you know, that's Sadaka, ourselves, Fairville Community Hub, ACT, and also ISRAC as the 5 main BAME organizations in the city, who've got facilities that they own or run, and actually do a lot of engagement work with the communities that they serve. And through that, we've met the chief exec of the council and some of the deputy chief exec. But the problem, because they're all new, the problem isn't there. The problem is at the front lines. It's the decision makers in the commissioners, the managers. It's the people who are in cahoots with each other, in my opinion. You know, whether you've got the 4, 5, 6 main community volunteer organizations in the city who have hundreds and thousands of pounds going into their accounts. You know, they've got staff coming out of their ears. You know, they've got 10, 15, 20 members of staff in those organizations. They've got, if you look at their accounts, they've got £500,000 plus, probably nearly £1 million coming into the bank accounts over the year. They are fully supported by the council. They're fully supported by other organizations. They've got links to people like Key Fund. They've got links regionally. They don't even have to jump through hoops for funding. While we are looked on as suspicion. You know, to give us £10,000, they expect us to do 101 things, to report back to them every 2 weeks, to tell them how many people, for example, the vaccination stuff. It's like they want us to report back weekly or every 2 weeks about how many people we've engaged with, how many things you've done, X, Y, Z. It's like, you're giving us a bit of money to do the work. Trust us to do the work. We'll give you an evaluation report. We will do all that stuff, but it takes time. It doesn't happen from day one, but they want results on day one, and they want to hold us accountable for every single penny that they give us, unfortunately. But it's not the same for everyone else in this city. It isn't the same. Groups like Ignite Imagination, you know, they might be fantastic what they do, but they get money left, right, and centre given to them without, you know, they operate in a number of parts of the city. They get money from all levels of funding, from whether it be the Healthy Activities Fund, whether it be local council funding, and they get supported. But any other organisation, BAME organisation, doesn't get that level of support, sadly.
Shahid, thank you. Can I just ask Adam to come in? He's been very patient, and then Rob wishes to continue.
Yeah, just thank you very much, Professor Kevin. I just want to come back on self-funding very briefly. Self-funding, in our experience at ISRAC, just identifying the process is difficult because there's no clear guidelines on how you apply, because the self-funding is not an application, it's a discretionary fund. And we came to realize probably after 1 year, after going into and identifying and then understanding the process. And they don't even explain to you clearly how the process works. Particular area or location to support you. That's the #1 criteria. It took us a couple of months just to know where we have to start. So you can imagine volunteers in a community organization identifying a process just to even look at that package, sale, where is sale? So even understanding how to apply for it. But anyway, we were told at the time, James Stankey was a cabinet and for housing and neighborhood, used to come to Israel. We said, how do we access this funding, Mr. James Stankey? And he said, we have 3 green councillors in the area and 3 Labour. You have to get them on board. All the 3 Labour councillors will support it. You have to get the green councillors to support it. So look at the predicament they're putting a community organization. The politics, which is in the town hall, now is being played through the communities. So the communities are being asked between 2 parties to get them in one room. So that's another task in itself. So the English saying, beggars doesn't choose. But in any case, we were able to bring the 6 together. So we made the effort of getting the 3 councillors from Green in the locality and the 3 Labour. And I think one of them didn't attend, but in principle, they said they supported. So at the end, it took us a lot of time and if you like, bringing 2 parties who have different visions together for just to support us on the SIL funding. So that in itself, engagement, it took us completely and probably a couple of months, but we did at the end, and they supported us. All the 6 councillors supported us. So after they've supported us, they said, put a proposal together of why you need SIL funding. You have to justify. So again, we put, I think 2A4, a summary why we need SIL funding. We gave it to them. They endorsed it. We sent it to Sarah Lucas at SIL, and I can't remember her second name or whether she's the right person I'm trying to quote, to the SIL officer who was dealing with it. But but there was no response. So we did all that legwork and the politics that involves in it, and yet we were going nowhere. No even official response, even no formal response. So they made us put a proposal. They made us speak to Labour first, get them on board, get the Green on board, get 6 of them on board, put a proposal, send it to them, no response. We gave it up, simply. We don't have the time and support and resources to chase that. So it's chasing the goose, if you like. So that is the experience. It's not just you apply application, seal whether they give you or no. It's not a straightforward, you submit an application, you get it or rejection. No, it wasn't that. It was even the politics that it involves in, trying to bring 2 parties who are controlling in a particular area to get their support. So they put us in a very difficult position. So that's just the point to make. But finally, when I started with Lunch Club is a grant aid. You're talking about 2,000-3,000 for the whole year. It's a very small funding. SIL funding, as the chair of Sadaka said, and Rob, big funding, millions. And some of the millions in our area, Israel, the Waitrose, we are located near Waitrose, the big student international building, brand new buildings, some of them are owned by BNE landlords who come have lunch at Israel. So they tell us how much they've paid into the SIL funding, into the pot. So in other words, even those buildings are owned by some of the black landlords. But having said that, that's not the point, is that we understand a lot of money has gone into the SIL. So in contrast, the point I'm trying to make here, from small funding, which is a grant aid funding for Lunch Club, 2,000 per year, which is not a lot of money, to big money, which is SIL funding, we can't access. Why I started with Lunch Club, it's a small grant aid. Even if they gave us, they will have given us 2,000 and said we've given 2,000 per year to Israel. Not a lot of money, but it will have been significant good gesture to show that they're working with the community. But they couldn't even give us the small funding. And now you're talking SIL, which is in a lot of money, which they are not even to give us. So the point I'm putting across is accessing small funding to big funding became impossible mission as far as the communities are concerned. So that's a point on the SIL funding. I will run very quickly on the FGM.
Before you go on, can I just give Rob an opportunity to come back, and then maybe we can come back to you, because time's just running away with us, and it's been the case for us all day and each for each set of hearings. So just bear with us, Adam. We'll come back to you. So Rob, can I just bring you in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. quite clearly what we have, and I use my language quite, quite purposely, but quite clearly what we have in Sheffield, given Ishfaq's experience, given PMC's experience, given Sadaka's experience, and the significant portion of the non-white communities in Sheffield that we jointly represent. There's a funding apartheid going on in Sheffield. Because if you represent Manor Castle or Manor, or Soar or Zest, or which is a new one on me, Ignite Imaginations. It seems to me that you already know what you'll be doing in 2022 into 2023, possibly 23 into 24, with the promise of funding that you're going to get. Right now in Sadaka, we can probably guess to the end of next week, because if we need something doing and it's going to take money next week, it's going to come out of one of the board members' pockets or another. And if we've got it, we take it out of our pockets and we do what we need to do. And in doing that, we've spent 6 figures of our own money in Sadaka. And I'm not talking small 6 figures either. I'm not talking 150 grand. All right? I'm talking at least double that, possibly triple that of our own money. That's what the kind of money that we're spending in Sadaka to get to where we've got with the amount of work that we've done. But it's clearly a funding apartheid going on. If you are from an organisation that largely represents white people in this city, your funding is fairly secure. And as Shahid said, and Shahid will remember when I came along to one of the first BEMA COVID-19 groups, and we were offered an opportunity to get something like 15 grand between about 10 different organisations. It would have meant that each organisation would end up with about £400 to £500. I said reject it. There's no point in us trying to get that kind of funding. Let's say Sadaka got £500. We're going to have to do at least 10 grand's worth of work to account for it back to the council or to VAS. I said leave it. And that's the position that we put in. One of the other things that I wanted to say is that, interestingly, the Ignite Imaginations, who I mentioned earlier from last week, who have now suggested today, they haven't said they're going to reject it, they're suggesting to reject that funding. That was a Windrush program that they were getting funding for. And what they wanted to do was to come out into our communities and get our voices on our experience from Windrush to now. Well, interestingly, I've been leading a project with Sheffield University called the Bantu Archive Programme with Sheffield University, where I have personally recruited 3 young black researchers, 3 young Bantu researchers, to get the stories of our elders, 3 young, of our elders, and with the engagement of the university that they would get paid. I'm not getting paid, that's fine. But the 3 researchers, for what they bring into this project, should get paid. And the university have managed to get funding for that. So the program that we've been doing, it's well publicised. Certainly there's enough people in the council that know about it. It's been publicised across social media. We've had programmes on BBC Radio Sheffield, on Radio Hallam. We've had articles in Sheffield Star. The council know about the programme. And even on top of that, because we've been, the idea has been circling on for about 3 years now, but we've actually been working actively with the university now for almost a year, the University of Sheffield. And even on top of that, they still gave that money. I'd like to, because this has been recorded, the council, Sheffield City Council, we need 30 grand to turn this archive from a physical one in South Sadaka, which we started, into a digital one that'll be online and will be worldwide. So we can look at our journey, not just to the city, why our parents came to the city, but their journey through the city, And it's things like this which really make you think, why are we here? Why is the council even trying to pretend that they're supporting what we do when we have a perfectly good project here, that is been run now for almost a year, that the council would sidetrack us and give this to an all-white organisation. And that leads me to the next point, that in Sheffield, we really need...
Sorry, before you move on, can I just ask one of our commissioners, Councillor Maroof, to say a little bit about SIL funding?
Okay.
Yeah. I think at this point it might be interesting to get some input.
Thank you, Professor Hilton. I mean, my day job is I'm a chartered surveyor, so I'm aware of planning and development and SIL on a daily basis. SIL basically is a payment made through a planning system. And I know you guys all will probably be aware of this anyway, but generally the idea of SIL money is to be spent within the area that is generated from. So if it's been generated in, say, in Adam's area, the money should be spent within that area. But what Sheffield uses at the present time is a system called, and I'm learning this as well, by the way, is a system where they use a deprivation multiplier and they divert the money to different areas. And that is probably the reason why it gives a great deal of autonomy to officers in terms of how they allocate that money using that multiplier. And I don't understand the multiplier at all. I understand the planning system, but I don't understand how they use that multiplier. So that, Professor Hilton, could be one of our questions of how they use the actual multiplier. But I do sympathise on the SIL side of things, because there is millions and millions of pounds, obviously, that do come through the SIL process, which is a planning legal requirement. So I thought just clarifying the SIL issue.
Thank you. Sarah, I know this session has taken a slightly different direction to the one that we did discuss, but it's great value for me, and I'm sure for you and everyone else listening. Is there a question you would like to follow up with any of the four?
Well, I was just going to say, because Shahid needs to go, so I've got a question to ask him in regards to the Sheffield Federation of the Mosques. So I think if I can ask that one before you quickly go at 5, if that's all right, Shahid.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so in hosting the Sheffield Federation of Mosques, how did the health organisations work with you regarding the COVID and in more generally as well?
The health organisations?
Yeah.
They haven't really. I mean, I represented the PMC at the first weekly and then bi-weekly, so once every 2 weeks, meetings of the public health body led by Sarah Hepworth and Shahid Ali. And any learning that we've got from there, we've fed back down through the network. We've set up protocols and things. I mean, I remember a meeting in February, well before the lockdown started, that we got together and discussed the possibilities of a lockdown, what would that mean for the mosques and worship places, etc. And funerals as well, and the funeral protocols. We put them in place before the lockdown even happened, to be honest with you. We were working on all that stuff off our own backs with no guidance or anything. Only what we could sort of pick up piecemeal from here and there. Once we were in lockdown, we've had a couple of meetings, not many. It's more through our network of contacts that we've kept them engaged to make sure that they all know what's expected of them, especially around social distancing and the safeguarding measures they have to put in place. I think they've done really well for that, especially for mosques not to be centres of COVID growth, because we know that a lot of mosques were open quite a bit, even though they were allowed, places of worship were allowed to be open and people were attending, especially vulnerable people. But I think they've done really well to make sure that they've kept on top of their safeguarding measures, etc., and getting people's names down and filling those forms in and everything. But it's not been, I mean, I think Greg Fell has written to mosque leaders across the city a number of times. Sometimes we've prompted Sarah to pass the message on to Greg as well about 1 or 2 issues with Eid and Ramadan and things like that. So he's set reminders out as a as his director of public health. I've got no real things. We could do a lot more with the body that there is. I think with Gary Ismail, he's also a chaplain at the Sheffield University and is chair of the Federation of Mosques. I mean, we host him. I think co-chair is Mr. Ali as well. Muhammad Ali is the chair of PMC. But we've done what we could in the best interest of the mosques, and got the message out. I think we've been successful in the way we've worked. I think for us, it wasn't about the money, because it was COVID. I think it was all hands on deck. I think the positive for us has been that there's been no real issues. There's been no news articles, blaming mosques for spreading COVID. Everything's, mosques have taken on the responsibility that they were given, and worked well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have just got a quick fire question for any of our 4 guests, and including Councillor Maroof as well. How is SIL different to Section 106? Does anyone have an answer to that?
Section 106, is that not funding through proceeds of crime?
No, Section 1, sorry, I can answer that question. Sorry, I was a bit distracted there. Okay, so SIL and Section 106 are both planning legal obligations. SIL is based on the, I think, and I need to be correct on this, is based on the square footage of a property, and a multiplier is used on that to define the actual payment a developer would make to the City Council. So the SIL money is a payment to the City Council. 106, I think, is money that is paid, and I need to correct this as well, for infrastructure costs, like improving of road systems, contributions to schools, etc., etc. That have to be paid so a development can happen. So there isn't a reduction in service in the area as a result of other people coming into it through development. So that is the difference. SIL is the more the one where it's directed at the communities and improvement of communities. But both of them are planning, are under planning law, both of the 106 and SIL.
Thank you for clearing that one up for Malcolm, and for all of us. So I'd like to just, Sarah, if I may, I'd like to just end with a question from Shruti. I'm just looking at the time, and it is 5 o'clock, and I know that we've horribly overrun, but in a good way, because there's still, we could easily, I'm looking at Adam's face and Ismail's face, and we could easily sit here for another hour, right?
Yeah.
But we do have your evidence, so that's not going to be lost, so we still have that, and we have Rob's evidence as well, and the PMCs. So we have a question here from Shruti, and I think we'll use this one to close.
Thanks, Kevin. To be honest, I think it's more of a comment from what I've heard, and I appreciate what Mohammed Maroof was saying about the index of multiple deprivation being used to make decisions. But what I was hearing from witnesses was that lobbying politicians, particularly hearing from Adam actually, lobbying politicians and connections to power structures are the key thing behind funding decisions, rather than data-driven evidence of need, or certainly that's the perception, and that's what you were told to do. And what I'm hearing from Councillor Maroof is that the index of multiple deprivation is key, and I know that's been around for decades, and I used to work in the team that managed that actually, and I wonder what the methodology is behind that. But I suppose what I'm also thinking is, well, if you don't know how these things work, if you're from a newer community with no knowledge or experience of the systems, how on earth do you get access to the funding, which maybe you need even more than any other community in Sheffield? So it's just a bit of a reflection and commentary really on what I've heard.
Is there a little question in there, or is that more of a summing up there, Shruti?
Yeah, it's a summing up. Sorry, Kevin.
Okay, I'm seeing that Shahid has to go, and I think on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much, Shahid, Ismail, Adam, and Rob. We really appreciate your time today, especially where this is your second appearance. Whether it's your organisation or you as an individual, we really appreciate that. Sarah, thanks for leading on the sessions, and commissioners for your contribution, not just in this session, but all day, and similarly with the Secretariat, and also Rob's little one over there. So thank you very much, everyone. Commissioners, I'll catch up with a few of you tomorrow, but most of you on Thursday. Thanks again for today, and we'll all speak soon. Thank you.